Excellent. I see that Councillor Gower has joined us, so we have quorum. So I will begin. I expect that we will have more members joining us, save those who have provided regrets. So good morning and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of June 20th, 2022. I'd like to call the members to order. Although this meeting is being held virtually, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which Ottawa is built upon is unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the people of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation and that they've lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the people and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable contributions to this land. Members are reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this subcommittee, residents may still make submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424 extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connections, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I'd like to note that this is a public meeting to consider the proposed Heritage Conservation District Plan for Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation Districts, listed as item 1 on today's agenda under the Ontario Heritage Act. Only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal this matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments may forward them to committee coordinator by email or by mail. I have received regrets from Councillor Moffat and Member Conforti. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they're called.
Member Halsell.
Here.
Member Podolsky.
Here.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Member Conforti. Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Moffat. Vice Chair Quinn.
Present.
Chair King, you have quorum.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? And I see Member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Yes, since I'm a practicing heritage professional, I'm involved in the 70 Nicholas Street Rideau Registry Office, and I would like to declare interest, please.
Thank you so much for doing that under item 6. So your declaration of interest has been acknowledged. Are the minutes of Tuesday, May 10th, 2022 confirmed?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Given the number of items on the agenda today, I'm going to proceed, which isn't my usual practice, but I'll proceed with a consent agenda. And on our consent agenda starts off with item 1, Heritage Conservation District Plan for Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation Districts. This item will be held for a presentation and delegations. Item 2, with the subject of additions to the Heritage Register, this item is going to be held for a presentation and delegations. Item 3, designation of 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This item is held for a presentation and delegations. Item 4, update on Somerset House at 352 Somerset Street West. This item is also held for a presentation. Item 5, application for demolition and new construction at 182 Murray Street. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Carried.
Item 6, application to alter 70 Nicholas Street. My understanding is that Councillor Fleury might have had a motion on this item. I do not see Councillor Fleury here. So my suggestion would be to hold this item as we are expecting the councillor to potentially move an item here. Item 7, application to alter 475 Oak Hill Road. And I know that Renzo Chiquetto from Functional Design is in attendance for this item. If this item carries, Renzo, do you wish to address the committee?
I might take a moment for him to join as a panelist chair.
Okay.
Yes, I think I've hit all the right buttons now.
Okay.
I feel the presentation is unnecessary. The Heritage Committee's report very well describes the project and gives it solid support. So it seems unnecessary to provide a presentation.
Okay, thank you for that comment. So is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Item 8, designation of the Hart Massey House at 400 Lansdowne Road under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I understand there is a technical amendment on this item. Vice Chair, can you introduce that motion?
I can. I'm just going to pull it up here. Thank you. Whereas Heritage staff have recommended that Council issue a notice of intention to designate the Hart Massey House at 400 Lansdowne Road under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And whereas the view of the property from the eastern shore of Mackay Lake is an important heritage attribute, and whereas the view of the property from the eastern shore of Mackay Lake was omitted from the statement of cultural heritage value as an attribute, therefore be it resolved that with respect to ACS 2022 PIERHU 0014 document 5 be replaced with a revised statement of cultural heritage value, the statement of cultural heritage value on file with the Office of the City Clerk to include the view of the property from the eastern shore of Mackay Lake as an attribute.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So is the motion carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Is the report carried as amended?
Carried.
Yes,
Carried.
Thank you. The next item is item 9, status update, Built Heritage Subcommittee inquiries and motions. Is this item received?
Received.
Received, thank you. And we will also be receiving a presentation in relation to 359 Kent Street and 436 and 444 McLaren Street at the end of the meeting under other business. We'll now return to item 1 on the agenda. In planning, real estate, and economic development, Heritage Conservation District Plan for Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation Districts. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay, excellent. Good morning. So we are excited to be bringing forward this report recommending adoption of the proposed Heritage Conservation District Plan for Centertown and Minto Park HCDs. I'll just, Eric, are you able to bring up the staff presentation for me?
I am. 1 minute, please.
Sure.
Chair.
Perfect. Great. Yes. So this is the result of several phases of the Centertown Heritage Study that has been ongoing for the past couple of years. So what I'd like to do this morning is give a bit of an overview of kind of how we got here, and then a short summary of the HCD plan for the committee. I'd like to also introduce our consultant on the plan, Sally Coots of Sally Coots Heritage Consulting. She's on the call with us today too, and happy to answer questions at the end as well. So if we go to the next slide, just a bit of background quickly. So the Centertown Heritage Study was initiated in 2018 when the city hired consultant ERA Architects to undertake an inventory of the whole Centertown neighborhood, doing a property by property review of the existing Centertown and Minto Park HCDs. So that's Centertown in the black outline and Minto in the purple. The inventory also looked at the neighborhoods to the east and west of the existing HCDs within that wider red boundary. So that was the first phase of the project. And as a result of the inventory, ERA came forward with a number of recommendations, including how to proceed with the plans for the existing HCDs. And that was part of the second and third phases of the project. As I mentioned, the city hired Sally Coots, heritage consultant, to undertake the preparation of the plan in consultation with staff and various stakeholders. And that's what's before the committee this morning. So if we go to the next slide, these, of course, are the existing Centertown and Minto Park HCDs. Centertown is quite large. It includes about 750 properties, and Minto Park is one of our smaller HCDs with only about 25 properties facing the park. Centertown was designated in 1997, and at the time of designation, City Council passed or approved a set of guidelines to help manage change in the area. Minto Park was designated 9 years before that, but it had no guidelines at all. And that's because prior to 2005, there was no requirement for designated districts to have management plans or guidelines. But in 2005, those changes made them requirements for any new HCDs, but also allowed municipalities to go back and create them for existing districts. So this is part of the city's bigger project to update all of our pre-2005 HCDs to meet those new or 2005 OHA requirements. If we go to the next slide, approaches and goals of the project. So this report, as the chair mentioned, recommends adoption of the proposed Centertown and Minto Park plan for these HCDs that meet the required components of the Heritage Act. And I'll go through them really quickly, just briefly. This plan also satisfies the direction from the Centertown secondary plan to update the original guidelines for Centertown, including that inventory that I mentioned, and also with the goal of accommodating for growth and intensification in the area. So the Centertown HCD plan and for Minto Park has attempted to bring the planning and heritage frameworks into alignment with each other. And in this way, I would say, I think this plan is a bit different from our other HCD plans in that it does speak to how to accommodate for growth and intensification while also conserving the values of both areas. And it does that by providing technical and detailed guidance for conservation together with clear guidance and expectations that perhaps we've been missing on some of the projects we've been seeing lately in Centertown. And that's really just to ensure the cultural heritage value and attributes are conserved in future development. So if we go to the next slide, I've got the required components that I mentioned introduced in 2005. They really dictate the structure of the plan. I won't go through the whole plan this morning, but just to give some highlights of the major sections. So on the next slide, these are the statement of objectives. Every plan provides a statement of objectives. They're really the overarching goals to be achieved through the designation of districts. The plan outlines 13. I've summarized a few of them here, but in general, they speak to the conservation of historic buildings and fabric and other elements that tell the history of the HCDs to ensure that changes like new construction in particular can be completed sensitively and compatibly, but also to celebrate and encourage awareness of the different histories and stories in Centertown as a community. On the next slide, we've got the statement of cultural heritage value of the districts. This is what outlines the important values of Centertown and Minto Park. Centertown's original had a statement of character that was completed as part of the original study. It was very focused on the area's role as the residential neighborhood for Parliament Hill. But through this update, there was an opportunity to recognize some of the evolution of the area and some of the histories and stories that weren't captured before, or stories that have maybe acquired some value over time. For example, in addition to being the home of many prominent Canadians associated with Parliament Hill, the statement now speaks to the mix of communities that have chosen Centretown as their home over time, and also its association with early community activism, particularly in Minto Park, that has been a rallying point and space for holding vigils and protests. The statement also highlights some of the history of the area from the later part of the 20th century that has become part of the story of Centretown. And if we go to the next slide, the list of attributes. So the plan must also include a list of the physical elements that express the values outlined in the statement. So the proposed plan includes a list of those organized into a few themes to correspond with the statement. So these attributes, together with the objectives and the statement of value, those are really the foundational pieces that we'd be looking for impacts when we receive applications. So I have included a few of those attributes here, but just from this list, I think you can see the areas are quite complex, with a mix of building types and spaces and places that each really require different guidance and direction to manage how they're conserved. So in order to appropriately address those differences, the plan, you'll notice, it's a bit longer. It's certainly more complex than the existing guidelines. And if we go to the next slide, just about the structure, I think we've tried to simplify it by breaking it up first by major sections relating to the most common types of applications and alterations that we typically see, with both policies and guidelines for assessing how changes should be undertaken. And like some of our other recent plans, the plan does distinguish between policies and guidelines, where the policy would be the required component and the guidelines would provide that technical guidance and a bit more flexibility that recognizes that you could achieve the policy in different ways. And then if we go to the next slide, the plan is further subdivided to provide more specific guidance by both building typology. So we've got specific sections for single detached house form buildings, low-rise residential forms, but also for historic apartment buildings and also Main Street commercial buildings on Bank and Elgin. And then if we go one more slide, it's also divided by its categories. So since all the properties within the boundaries are considered designated, just like in our other HCDs, properties are distinguished by those that have elements that express the reasons the HCDs are designated versus ones that do not. So, and the way that we do that is by categorizing properties as contributing, or those that express the reasons for designation, or non-contributing being those that don't. And then of course, providing direction that correspond and relate to those categories. So if we go to the next slide, in general, the contributing properties, those are the ones that we would want to see retained. We don't want to see those demolished. We want to see them conserved and restored. And we'd want to ensure that any alterations are compatible and sympathetic to the existing building, but also within the HCD as a whole. And then conversely, if we go to the next slide for non-contributing properties, those still need to follow the heritage permit process, but the plan encourages improved compatibility of the existing building, but it does contemplate demolition of those buildings on those properties, provided that the design and replacement would be appropriate and meet the plan as well. Next slide. So the document does speak to both the Centretown and Minto Park HCDs and provides general direction for both. But it was integral to recognize that Minto Park is its own HCD. So the plan has specific policies and guidelines to recognize that special character and ensure the important relationship between the buildings and the buildings that face the park and the park itself are protected and conserved. On the next slide, we did also include a special area around the Museum of Nature. So there's a special section in the plan that provides guidance for development that surrounds the museum. And really that's to ensure that, if there's new development, the museum remains the focal point. It encourages high quality and complementary design. There's also some guidelines for landscaping and lighting as well. If we go to the next slide, for new construction. So in order to satisfy the direction in the secondary plan and ensure the HCD plan accommodates for growth and intensification, you'll notice that the proposed HCD plan not only includes directions for new houses and apartments, but also sections for mid and high-rise buildings. And that really the intention there is to provide the heritage context to the existing secondary plan and community design plan, to that framework for this area. So as you know, those documents contemplate taller buildings than the existing historic fabric. So it was important to provide direction for how those types of buildings could coexist in the HCDs. So there's those sections include guidance on transition, consideration of surrounding contributing properties, using design measures like step backs and appropriate materials in order to be compatible and sensitive, and with a particular focus on the lower levels. The plan also emphasizes that instead of demolishing existing buildings, they should be incorporated into bigger projects. So there's a section to provide guidance for how to integrate contributing properties into the development. And I've got an example here of the recent application that I think the committee will probably be familiar with. And then the HCD plan also provides some guidance on how to approach a proposal for a landmark building within the historic context. So that brings me to the second recommendation of the report. If we go to the next slide, the former Centertown secondary plan, which is now consolidated or will be consolidated in the new OP as part of the Central and East Downtown Core secondary plan. It notes that in certain situations with very prescribed locational and architectural, also programmatic criteria, that a landmark building may be contemplated within the HCD. So the proposed district plan provides a section that gives direction and guidance for how those landmark policies in the secondary plan might be satisfied. However, staff are looking for direction to take a closer look at those secondary plan policies should this plan be approved, to ensure that the intent and objectives of the HCD plan can continue to be supported, and that the clarifications that I think we've made in the HCD plan are being appropriately reflected back in the planning documents. So if as a result of that review, there are amendments to that secondary plan policy that are necessary, that will be through an official plan amendment process and with the full consultation that comes with that. If we go to the next slide, the third recommendation in the report, it's a largely technical and administrative recommendation, and it relates to the 15 individually designated properties within the Centertown boundaries. There are no Part 4s in the Minto Park HCD at this time, but so just Centertown. But as this committee may be aware, prior to those changes I mentioned in 2005 to the Heritage Act, properties could not be designated both individually and as part of a district. That has since changed, so staff are recommending that the original designation bylaw for the district now be registered on title for these properties, just for clarification purposes. And finally, if we go to the next slide, the last recommendation relates to kind of the next steps in the Centertown Heritage Study to further investigate the potential for district designation in the Dundonald Park area and also the Golden Triangle area in Centertown. So Dundonald Park, that was recommended through the inventory work by our consultant, and the Centertown Community Association also is interested in further investigation and review of the Golden Triangle. And staff agree that these areas merit some further study. So just looking for council direction and committee's direction to add these studies to the Heritage Planning Branch's work plan. And just quickly, I'll go to the next slide on consultation. Although the Heritage Act only requires one statutory public meeting, this project has really benefited from a number of consultation components, both in person and virtual through the pandemic. The details of those have been outlined in the staff report. And for the purposes of the Act today, as the chair mentioned at the beginning, this will be the Build Heritage Subcommittee meeting today will be the required public meeting for the purposes of the Act. And owners within the boundary were notified in advance as per the Heritage Act requirements. And then finally, just to conclude on the last slide, staff are recommending adoption of the proposed Heritage Conservation District Plan for Centertown and Minto Park HCDs, and also the recommendations, as I mentioned, that are outlined on the screen. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mackenzie, for the very in-depth report and for the tremendous amount of work that has been undertaken for this conservation district plan, along with the rest of the team. So thank you so much for that. We did receive correspondence on this item from a resident dated June 17th with comments, as well as from Heritage Ottawa, also dated June 17th, which was circulated. We do have a number of registered speakers, and the first registered speaker on the list is Jack Hanna from Centertown Community Association. So Jack, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. I am speaking on behalf of the Centertown Community Association. I want to compliment city staff for working on this project, who devised the new regulations for the 2 existing heritage districts in Centertown. That's Mackenzie Kim, Avery Marshall, and Leslie Collins. These folks conducted an extended conversation with the Community Association, and it was very good. First off, we all began talking to each other early. There were meetings between the Community Association and city staff from the earliest days, before anyone on either side had solidified their thinking. Second, the meetings we had consisted of great conversations. Ideas were floated, city staff spoke with us openly, sometimes working towards agreement, sometimes disagreeing, but always it was quality conversation. Internally within the Community Association, a lot of people put a lot of work into this. And I know city staff appreciated our commitment. They viewed the Community Association as a source of perhaps useful ideas. And when we made sense, they heard us. All of this is reflected in the document before you. We support this plan. The Centertown Community Association wants intensification. We know cities must achieve far higher density. We want density, both in Centertown and across the entire city. We believe strong intensification can be achieved even in neighborhoods of beautiful heritage houses. We can have both intensification and the preservation of heritage character. This plan is a good tool to achieve just that. And finally, we note that part of the motion before you instructs staff to explore the potential for 2 new heritage districts in Centertown. The Centertown Community Association is delighted. That's great news. Come next winter, we look forward to rolling up our sleeves and working with the city's excellent staff to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack, for your presentation. And I share your comments in terms of the tremendous work that staff undertook on this plan. I'm very pleased that they were working very well with the community association. That's what we want to hear. City staff working in conjunction with residents to really formulate the best policies and guidelines possible. So thank you so much for your delegation. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you. Our next registered speaker is Erwin Dressen.
Good morning, Chair and members of the subcommittee. I first would like to ask the coordinator whether the members have received my written submission.
Yes, all written submissions have been.
Thank you very much. That makes it easier. I wish to express my strong support for this plan. Having moved into Centertown exactly 2 years ago, I just missed the most most of the public consultation related to this development caught just the tail end of it. I want to acknowledge the willingness of Mackenzie Kim to hear and even accommodate my late stage comments. It is much appreciated. One of the comments I made was on the use of the word adjacent in chapter 9 of the plan. Staff agreed that adjacent, as meaning contiguous, is too narrow a term to apply to heritage buildings. So substitution was made to quote adjacent or across the street, unquote, or surrounding. Unfortunately, there is one inappropriate instance of adjacent that remains, which I'm sure is an oversight. It's in the section on landmark policies, policy number 4, where I suggest that the word immediately adjacent be replaced with adjacent or surrounding. Now, one regret I have with this plan is the limited protection, provided to streetscapes. The Centertown Community Association commented a number of specific protections to 7 of them, and 5 of those are listed on page 13 of the plan, along with 2 others, plus the houses surrounding Minto Park. Unfortunately, unlike the houses north of and facing the Museum of Nature, these streetscapes are not offered specific protection. And that's a pity, because in every instance that is on this list, there are 1 or more gaps of non-contributing buildings, and a specific policy would have offered more certainty as to what can or cannot happen when someone has ideas about those gaps. Another point is there is a bit of a muddle regarding the Aberwin Co-op, 299 Somber Street West. It was constructed sometime after 1997. I'm sorry, I just noticed that my video wasn't on. I apologize for that. This co-op is mentioned on page 10 as an example of incorporation of several historic buildings. And indeed, on the map, 263 Somerset and 231 O'Connor are shown as contributing. However, in Appendix B, the list there shows only 231 O'Connor as contributing, and 263 Somerset is listed as non-contributing. And the 299 Somerset address is nowhere to be seen. So there is some correction that needs to be made there, I suggest. So this leads me to the other regret I have about this plan. Like the ERA report that preceded it, it shows a strong bias towards finding heritage value, especially in buildings dated from before World War I. I fear that it's a bias that many people in the heritage community share, but I do not. To me, heritage is a living heritage. And many buildings of more recent vintage, such as Aberwin Co-op, should have been recognized as contributing. So I see that my time is going faster than I had hoped. I would like to go to my later points, that I would hope that there is at some point a study of high-rises in Centertown. It would be an opportunity to separate the good buildings from the very poor buildings. Last point I'm going to make is that I'm giving you a heads up that I'm preparing an application for Part 4 protection of 330 Gilmore Street, the former Ottawa Board of Education building complex. So when I moved to Centertown, the community association and my neighbors said, oh, this is heritage protected. It turned out that it isn't. And so hopefully not before too long, you will have that application before you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dreesen, for that very in-depth analysis of the plan. We are really thankful that we have many community associations and residents providing a tremendous amount of input to heritage staff about these plans, and appreciate all the work that you've provided and the correspondence that you provided to this committee. I don't see any hands raised for questions for you. So thank you so much for your delegation this morning. And our next registered speaker is Hunter McGill.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I hope you don't mind, but I would like to join the chorus of praise for city staff for their thorough, patient, and careful work throughout the last 4 years, bringing us to this particular point where we have a very appropriate, useful, and important proposal for your committee to consider, and I sincerely hope approve. Leslie Collins, Mackenzie King, and Avery Marshall really went above and beyond, I think, the call of duty, and I think that needs to be recognized. They're very patient people, good listeners too. And I just think that this process represents, a very appropriate way of proceeding with regard to the examination of built heritage issues and how they can be protected and preserved. I have 2 points. Sorry, just before I do, I would like to echo Erwin's, Jason's point about the importance of protecting streetscapes. In heritage protection, we tend to look at individual built structures, but streetscapes in Centertown in particular are a vital aspect of heritage protection. 2 points, if I may, sir. Compliance. The hard part starts next in many respects, in that now the application of the plan and in its various dimensions will come before you in the process. And I think you have an information item at the end of your meeting that you already referred to for a proposed development, a contemplated development on Kent Street. And that will raise a number of very critical questions about landmark buildings, which you are also invited to endorse policy work on. And I urge you to go ahead with that work, but to proceed carefully and very deliberately with regard to that work, because the consequences of a landmark building policy will have very considerable ramifications right across the city, but particularly in Centertown. And finally, sir, I just want to say how encouraging it is that staff are proposing for your consideration that work begin on these for the west of Dundonald Park and the Golden Triangle area. Those areas of the city contain important built heritage resources that need protection now, and that a good policy framework drawing on the work that's been done for Centertown and Minto Park will be an essential tool for staff, for you to proceed. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. McGill, for your very informed comments, as well as for your thanks to staff, hardworking heritage staff who have really done a tremendous amount of work on this report. I don't see hands raised for questions for you, so thank you for your deputation this morning. And the next registered speaker on the list is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Good morning. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heritage Ottawa is pleased to support these recommendations and congratulate Heritage Planning staff and various community representatives involved in the thorough consultation throughout this process. It should stand as a model for similar activities in other parts of the city. These updated plans, including the preparation of statements of cultural heritage value and attributes, were long overdue. Hopefully, it will provide enhanced protection of heritage properties in light of the all too common development proposals that seek the construction of buildings that exceed the maximum density and height permitted under the approved guidelines. It is hoped that the city will apply the same diligence in enforcing the application of elements and attributes of the plan for the enhancement of the heritage preservation in Centertown and Minto Park. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and your correspondence. It's much appreciated. And once again, for congratulating staff on work, I think that was well done. Our last registered speaker for this item is James Ho.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. We can hear you and you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf, I'm a small landlord at 242 Bank between Lisgar and Cooper on the west side. Basically, I'm not opposed to heritage really, but it's basically personally, it creates a financial problem for me, like basically in doing like either renovating or doing work on the property. I got a problem now with an overhang on the property. And basically, to keep it heritage or not keep it heritage, there's a big difference in cost for doing the renovations. As it stands now, almost 50% of my revenue goes to the government, which means I'm basically a 50-50 owner with partner with the government and myself. Well, my main concern now is basically financially keeping the upgrade of the property. I don't know if there's any kind of rebates or financial, what do you call it, the things are going to apply for in keeping the property heritage. And the thing is, I'm looking at the building, I don't see any heritage value in the property itself. Whoever did the research on deeming it being heritage, it's a one-story brick building that's been painted, and it's been like that for the last 50 years. I've owned it for 50 years. And basically, it's going to be a financial burden to me to actually keep it as a, like if it's heritage, I could keep a certain shape of it for renovations or whatever. Like I say, I'm just a small property owner. I've had this property in our family for over 50 years. And with the COVID-19 for the last 2 years and everything else, I'm basically losing a lot of money based on inflation. I'm basically getting less money now than I am 10 years ago, like in my pocket. And basically trying to keep basically good tenants. It's been a drain in my pocketbook, really. That's all I have to say. I can have my brother here. He likes to say a couple of words too.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that generally heritage is good for keeping the look and the historic values of the building. However, those mentioned before that to avoid the housing crisis and to
practical reasons,
like you look at countries such as Japan, Hong Kong, and other countries that do not have these restrictive heritage laws, there is no housing crisis. So in the event that, that there is some certain development, really these rules place impediment and increase ultimately on the tenants and commercial property tenants such as retailers and such.
And once again, practically keeping it heritage, and the onus is on the landowner. It should be, if you want to keep something heritage, it should be governmentally financed somehow, because like I say, we've had this property for over 50 years. We just finished paying for everything. But the thing is, with inflation and everything else, more than half my money is going in taxes to the government.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Ho, for your submission, as well as I believe Joseph joined you. So we thank you for your submission. I don't see any hands raised, but I would just emphasize to you that, of course, in heritage conservation districts, there are certain responsibilities that property owners have, and of course, it's important that that is recognized. And this has been a district for a long period of time. So that's important to recognize. It's also important to recognize that there are some tools that the city is going to provide to property owners. We have introduced a new heritage community improvement plan that allows owners who are redeveloping their properties to potentially take advantage of grant incentives or a tax incentive in terms of the redevelopment of their property. So that is a possibility. The other element I want to emphasize is that you're right. We are not Japan or other types of jurisdictions where there is no zoning imperatives. In Japan, you can have a residential building next to an industrial building. We have a different set of approaches, obviously, in Ontario towards planning, and obviously that needs to be recognized. I did see some hands raised. I don't know if I addressed some of the questions that had been raised by this delegation. I see that hands went back down, so I'm assuming there are no questions for this delegation. But otherwise, thank you so much for your delegation. We are listening to you, and we do hear you, and we are sympathetic of the fact that there are massive costs, obviously, with the inflation that's impacting our city. Now, seeing that we have no other registered speakers, do the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that Barry raised his hand first.
Yes, thank you, Chair King. Can I be heard? Am I unmuted? Thank you. One thing is that I really do compliment the staff and the community for collaborating on this new heritage conservation plan for Centertown, as others have. And of all of the heritage districts in Ottawa, Centertown has been the area where the challenges of the official plan and secondary official plan and zoning have come directly in conflict with the heritage objectives. And I'm glad to see that there are recommendations, particularly recommendation number 2, for reviewing of the secondary OP directives and also the landmark building guidelines. So I have the question for staff, for Mackenzie. Can you just share with us the progress that has been made in talking with the land use planning staff about future changes to the secondary OP and things like the landmark guideline area, so that the transition period between the adoption of this plan, the Heritage Conservation Plan, and the changes of the OP is made as short as possible, so that the uncertainty about which of the city's policies are in the ascendancy is made as compact as possible. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of background on how much progress has been made there. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, it's a good question, and I think certainly through this process we have worked very, very closely with our colleagues internally, with development review staff, with colleagues in different departments, forestry, right-of-way, urban design. So they have been instrumental in putting this draft together and working with our consultant as well. So I would say we're in really good shape. This recommendation, the second recommendation, is really to just make sure that what we have recommended in the draft is mirrored and reflected back in those landmark policies, and it is specific to that landmark provision in the secondary plan, to make sure that we've captured what we're looking for, the intent intent and objectives of the secondary plan from the HCD plan into the secondary plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I, of course, will be supporting the staff recommendations.
Thank you. And I see that Member Hassel has raised her hand.
Yes, like my colleagues, I'd like to congratulate city staff on this lovely initiative. And my question actually pertains to how it will be published. So currently the city has a mix of HCD plans available on its website, but a few of the older ones, including Centertown, are available only by request. So as a note to staff, would it be able to have this one and perhaps several of the others as well published on the website so that residents can read through and familiarize themselves more easily?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Absolutely. This once this goes through, if it's adopted by council, it will go through the appeal period. Once it comes into force and effect, absolutely, it will be posted online in French and English and made accessible for the public to review.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And now happy to toss to the award counselor, Councillor McKinney.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair King. I'm just going to provide, I don't have questions. I just want to provide some comment. Of course, I want to start by thanking staff for your work, Leslie, Kim, and this began a few years back. And as you heard from members of the community, there was real meaningful consultation that took part. And it's why we're here today with a plan that is well supported by the community. So thank you for that. Thank you to the community. Again, we asked you to put in a tremendous amount of work and time, your time. You did, and we have come to a place again where we have a new HCD that is well supported and that will help to retain the unique heritage aspects of this area, and we are uniquely situated. The Centertown residential neighborhood has historically played such an important role in Ottawa's growth as the nation's capital. And it's retained over time its residential context, if you will, while at the same time adding, other mixes that make it, accessible, walkable, and a 15-minute neighborhood, which is what we want. We want this in all of our neighborhoods now across the city, and we really have guided this neighborhood into a 15-minute neighborhood. And you heard today that residents of Centertown are supportive of intensification. And these renewed HCDs, the Centertown, the Minto Park HCDs, will provide opportunity to add new residents and new uses to Centertown while still, retaining the things that matter. So we can do both, and this plan will allow us to do that. And it was also suggested that, that heritage, the things that make Centertown's heritage unique, is recognizing, characteristics that are not just about physical attributes of buildings, but also include landscape. It includes, tree-lined streets, dense, that, that urban canopy that we need, vibrant main streets, with thriving small businesses, diversity in housing that meets everyone's needs. And we've really moved towards that, and it is it feels like we're going to retain that and build on that, given these two HCDs. So again, I thank you. Heritage conservation is about, a sense of place, and we're very proud of these two conservation districts. We're proud of our neighborhood. We're proud of Centertown, and we will continue to guide that, as it continues to grow and change, which is what we want, while still retaining the things that are so important and that make it such a unique neighborhood. So thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the members of the subcommittee as well.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney. Do any other members have any comments on this item? Seeing none, I just also want to mirror what the ward councillor said in terms of the balance. I think that what's wonderful about these plans is that it provides balance between the diversity of heritage buildings in the existing districts, as well as balancing the objective to accommodate more population growth and new contemporary buildings, and ensuring that we have more comprehensive descriptions and guidelines for individual buildings and streetscapes, architectural guidelines for new buildings and additions to existing buildings, and guidelines and policy around modifications to the current boundary. So I'm really pleased with the tremendous amount of work that has been undertaken with this study. And I really do, once again, for the umpteenth time, want to really congratulate staff on work well done and on their hard effort. So is this report carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. So this report will be submitted to City Council on July 6th, 2022. The next item is additions to the Heritage Register. And I believe that we have a technical amendment to remove some properties from the list of proposed additions. So I will ask the Vice Chair to introduce that motion.
Thank you, Chair. Whereas through report ACS 2020 PIERHU 0019, staff have recommended that Council list 55 properties on the Heritage Register under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And whereas property owners were notified of the potential listing on June 1st, 2022, and whereas the owners of the properties located at 100 Riverdale Avenue, 1152 St. Pierre Street, and 1898 Chêne Court have contacted staff with new information about their properties. And whereas staff recommend that additional time be provided for the consideration of this new information as it relates to the listing of these three properties, therefore be it resolved that with respect to ACS 2022 PIERHU 0019, the Built Heritage Subcommittee 1, amend the reference to the number of properties from 55 to 52 on pages 3 and 5 of the staff report, and 2, remove the properties at 100 Riverdale Avenue, 1152 St. Pierre Street, and 1898 Chêne Court from the list of properties to be listed on the Heritage Register, attached as document 1 to the report.
Thank you for introducing that motion, Vice Chair Quinn. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Yes, just one moment. Good morning. Okay, I think I'm ready to get started now. Thank you. Good morning. For those who haven't met me before, my name's Avery Marshall. I'm the coordinator of the Heritage Register, and I'm one of the co-authors of this report. Additions to the Heritage Register recommends listing properties across Ottawa on our Heritage Register. I'd like to provide some information about Ottawa's Heritage Register, share what it means for owners, and tell you a little bit about how the properties in the report were identified. You can go to the next slide, please. The Heritage Register is the City of Ottawa's official list of properties with cultural heritage value or interest. It provides reliable data about Ottawa's heritage properties, and it promotes a knowledge and understanding of Ottawa's cultural heritage. It tells us key information about Ottawa's heritage building stock. The Heritage Register is routinely consulted as part of the review of development applications and other permit applications such as demolition permits. The Heritage Register is available for the public on both ottawa.ca, which is the image here, as well as on Geo Ottawa. Next slide, please. So what does it contain? The Heritage Register includes both designated properties. It also includes non-designated properties. So the presentation I'm giving now and the report we're considering refer to non-designated properties. These properties are also known as listings or as listed properties. So these properties are on the list, but they are not designated. Our current Heritage Register listings are shown here in blue. This image is from Geo Ottawa, so it's a layer you can turn on under planning, and you can look at all of the Heritage Register listings as these blue markers. So right now in Ottawa, we have about 4,500 listings. This number is not static, it changes each year with our reports. The intent is for our Heritage Register to evolve over time so it can better reflect Ottawa's buildings, histories, and different communities here. Next slide, please. So the notice of intent to demolish. So this is the only requirement under the Heritage Act. It's a requirement for owners to give written notice, of their intent to demolish. The notice period, as you may know, it's a 60-day period. So the City of Ottawa cannot issue a demolition permit during the 60 days. So what this does is it gives us a pause before the building is lost forever. During the 60 days, staff may review the property and determine if a designation, individual designation is recommended. During this time, we also notify the ward councillor and the chair of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, Chair King, and let them know that the owner intends to demolish and that they may request a report on designation from staff. After the expiry of the 60 days, if the demolition permit application is compliant with applicable laws, the city then can issue a demolition permit. There are no other Ontario Heritage Act requirements. Next slide, please. So more about this report specifically. So in this report, we're looking at a group of properties that we've been reviewing the last couple of years. Heritage planning staff, we reviewed dozens and dozens of properties that were identified from our last report in 2020, so the last 2 years approximately. The properties have come to us from a variety of sources, many from community associations, one from a councillor. We also had neighbors, historical societies, as well as some from staff. We had a team of our heritage planners conduct an initial review of the properties and they looked at elements of design, history, and context for the buildings. Out of the ones that were reviewed, properties that staff believe to contain cultural heritage value are recommended in this report. The properties are recommended as additions to the Heritage Register for their cultural heritage value. In general, there's no theme or specific categories for the buildings, but overall, I would say they do represent a mix of Ottawa's building types and styles from the 19th and 20th centuries. Most of the buildings, almost all of them, are wood frame houses that are clad in brick. And I've just put a few up here, examples that reflect the flat roof construction across downtown. So you'll see here a Lower Town apartment, a semi-detached house in Vanier, as well as a detached home in New Edinburgh. The buildings shown on this slide and the upcoming slides are recommended as additions to the Heritage Register. More detail about each property is included in a property information sheet that we've included with the report. It's supporting documents 3 and 4. And we have heard from owners on them, on some of the information in the reports, and I'll touch on that in a future slide. We can go to the next one, please. So for the notices, as mentioned in the motion, we did mail out a notice on June 1st stating that city staff recommend their property for listing on the Heritage Register. The mail out included a letter from staff that explained a little bit more about the Heritage Register, how to participate today, and it also included the Heritage Property Information Sheet. Many owners reached out to staff over the past several weeks, and others in the past couple of days. Some owners shared new information with us about their properties. In some instances, these were alterations that we were not aware of. In other instances, it was some interior features that we were not aware of. Some owners, in each case, staff had the opportunity to answer questions and listen to the concerns and challenges that are facing each of the property owners. In addition to owners, we did also contact community associations, historical societies, including Heritage Ottawa, and each of the ward councillors. Those notices went out by email, and we heard from several of those groups as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the policy framework that we're working with for the Heritage Register, we do look at the official plan. So the city's current official plan and its new approved official plan do provide that the City of Ottawa will maintain a heritage register according to the Ontario Heritage Act. Ontario's provincial policy also states that long-term economic prosperity will be supported by encouraging a sense of place and conserving built heritage resources. In the Heritage Act, Section 27 of the Act allows municipalities to list non-designated properties of cultural heritage value or interest on a municipal heritage register. So our own heritage register procedures that were approved by council several years ago, as well as the Ontario Heritage Act, require approval of listings by council after it's consulted with its Built Heritage Subcommittee. Next slide, please. So the objection is new. So I'll just take a minute to go over what this is and what it means. Following a decision by council, property owners will be mailed a second notice. So this second notice would inform them that either the property was or was not listed on the Heritage Register following the July 6th council meeting. The notice would contain detailed information on how to object to the Heritage Register listing. This objection process is new. It stems from changes to the Ontario Heritage Act that came into effect last year. The Ontario Heritage Act now states that if the owner objects, they shall write to the city clerk and set out the reasons for the objection and all relevant facts. The clerk's office would then notify our team Heritage Planning that an objection was received. Then our team Heritage Planning, we would prepare a report regarding the objection and bring that forward to committee and council. And so at that time, committee and council would then decide if the property should be removed from the Heritage Register or if it should remain. Then the owner would be notified again of council's decision. So this formal procedure is new and it does bring more accountability and transparency to the listing process. So this objection process is available to owners of properties included in this report. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and this is to close. I want to emphasize that the Heritage Register continues to be an important tool that our team uses, and many developers, real estate agents, professionals across the city, researchers, students are using to learn about Ottawa's buildings and also for consulting in terms of conservation of heritage properties across Ottawa. The Heritage Register data gives us key information about heritage buildings here, and it allows us to closely monitor demolitions. Heritage planning staff have recommended listing these properties on the Heritage Register. I think with the motion, it would be 52 properties for their cultural heritage value and interest. So adding these properties to the Heritage Register would update the Heritage Register in wards across Ottawa, about a dozen wards in the city. It also increases the overall quality of the Heritage Register here in Ottawa. Thank you for your consideration.
And thank you, Avery, for the detailed report. We did receive correspondence from a number of residents concerning the registry, and as well as David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. We do have two registered speakers. The first speaker is Mary Maxime Hubert, who will, I believe, be utilizing slides as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for hearing me out. My name's Mary Maxime. I'm a pharmacoeconomist for the Government of Canada. I'm also the owner of Maison Boyer at 1898 Cheyne Court. So maybe before getting into slides, I just want to relay what this means for me. Basically, 2 weeks ago, I received a letter saying that our house was considered for the addition on the Heritage Registry and as a non-designated listing. I was initially overjoyed, very, very proud. I know that the house has some cultural elements, and even though it blends a little bit in the area, I've always felt as it was special. However, past this initial joy was some concerns. So I immediately thought, does that mean I will need a permit to do anything in the house? And it was easy to research online and confirm that the nuance of that responsibility really hangs on the designated and not on the heritage word. However, there's still a lot of confusion in the general public, as well as real estate people. So immediately when they hear heritage, they think, oh, okay, well, will you be doing restoration? I'm guessing now you're going to need permits for things. And I also found some articles specifically about these heritage homes in Ottawa, which sounded quite scary. There's a report saying this man hired expert consultants that evaluated the loss of value to be around $230,000 for his property. Another one being relayed by a friend saying, well, you know, there's this case downtown, it's very famous. This owner was stuck with rooms for about 6 years because of fire damaged his property, and there's been objections for the demolition. So my concern is, if I put my house for sale in the future, the wording heritage, the fact that it can easily be found online, does that mean that potential buyers will not even, you know, give it the time of the day? Does that mean that the real estate will say, oh no, let's take this one off the list because I see it's on the heritage registry, and won't even provide the opportunity to clarify the distinction between the designation aspect of things? So I really want to highlight that, yes, of course, there's a side of things that is, well, you know, if you're not planning to demolish the house, this has no consequence. You know, it's only an extra 30 days of warning. And, you know, in the past, it doesn't look like the city has interfered. I really want to highlight that this house is really the most valuable possession that I have. Its value in the long term will determine whether I will need to work an extra 3 years before retiring. So I want to, as much as I believe this addition to register can be a good thing, I want to request some additional time in order to hire some people, get some consultations, get some thoughts, and really get into a informed decision. Next slide, please. So to sum it all up, oh, can I change it? Oh, thank you. So this is the house. So I want to mention that there are some architectural features that the way they were listed are a bit misleading, which diminishes the monetary value of the house. Of course, it adds character and whatnot. And given the fact that some expert consultants evaluated the significant loss of resale value, and I know that there's been some deferrals granted by the committee, I would hereby ask for a deferral of, well, please, at least 90 days. It's the summer. We would like to be able to get some professionals, get some either lawyers or real estate people, really round up what would be determined as experts to have just a balanced decision. Glenn Gower, I see that you have your hand up.
Thank you for your, yes, thank you. Thank you for your submission. And I am the chair of this meeting. So I see that Councillor Gower has raised his hand. Your time has expired. He does have a question for you, Councillor Gower.
Thank you, Chair. So this committee previously, when we have had property owners who've raised concerns about having their properties listed, one of the tests or one of the things we ask is around if you have had a chance to discuss your concerns with city staff, or is this the first time that you're making staff aware of your concerns here at committee?
I'm not sure I understand the question. City staff, who's city staff?
So have you had a chance to discuss these concerns before today with heritage staff at the city?
I did have a talk with Avery Marshall.
Okay, thank you. And you referenced in your talk that some of the description of the architectural features were misleading. Can you give us a bit more details about what you thought was misleading?
Yes, actually the next two slides are on that. So if you'd like some visual aid, I can point to the presentation. One of the aspects was saying that the house was a 1.5 story house. However, when, yes, next slide, please. I'm not sure. Thank you so much. So the features of interest. So these were described as a building representative of an early Ontario residence with cross gable roof, constructed in the 19th century, a building being 1 1/2 stories and features wood clapboard siding, plain trim rectangular windows, and doors in an exposed stone foundation. So I would argue that the house actually has 2 stories. All of the upper level is being used. And what is seen on the house is actually not wood clapboard. It's actually just regular metal siding. If I can get to the next slide. I just want to highlight that my perspective is, you know, from a real estate side of things in terms of the resale value of the story. So when looking into the 1.5 story, the definition is a 1.5 story home has a second floor that is about half the size of the main floor off to one side. They do not have a second floor in the attic, but have a true second floor. It's not as large. So in terms of the space, this implies that the house has a lot less space than it actually has. If I can go to the next slide, please. So don't take my word for it. Just have a look at the pictures that are featured online on Google Maps. You'll notice that in terms of the exterior, you can clearly see that there are 2 sets of windows. I can, of course, complement that with pictures of the inside of the house, but I didn't think anybody would be that interested in seeing such personal photos at a committee. I just really want to highlight that if it's possible to make sure that the description is accurate. I do see it as a prestigious thing to get the heritage register listing. I just want it to be for the real reasons. I just want it to be for the actual characteristics of the house as well.
And Councillor Gower, if you allow me to interject, I was just surprised by staff that Marie's property is in the motion, which would allow for that extension and delay for there to be more back and forth with staff to ensure that the property owners is fully consulted with heritage staff. So just wanted you to note that we just got that confirmation based on the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair Canning. I didn't have the motion in front of me, so that's helpful. Merci, Marie, pour votre présentation aujourd'hui, et merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. And I'd like to also note, of course, that listing a property on the Heritage Register obviously does not prevent owners from making repairs, alterations, or additions to their properties. As we had heard in the presentation, owners of a listed property would have to provide the city with 60 days notice if they wish to demolish the building. And during that time, the city could assess whether the property merits heritage designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It's also important to note that being listed on the Heritage Register is not a stepping stone to designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Being on the register would only impact an owner if they sought to demolish the property. Many property owners also value their properties being added to the register. I know that the resident who was talking to us, Marie, who's talking to us today, was talking about the impacts of value, but often those are very specific scenarios. In fact, I know that there was research, and I don't know how recent it was, but I know that there was research out of the University of Waterloo that in fact really demonstrates that there appears to be a distinct and generally robust market in designated heritage properties. And in fact, they generally perform well in the market, with many at a certain point when the study was done, with approximately 3/4 doing on average better than average. So we just want to ensure that people know that this registry is a net benefit to the city, and often a net benefit to property owners, not a negative. But we do understand the need for proper dialogue and back and forth between residents and the city staff, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that in the motion that was presented before us. So just want to reassure you that that staff will come back to you, and we'll continue to ask questions. So thank you so much for your delegation. I don't see other hands, so thank you so much for appearing before us this morning. And we do have one more registered speaker, and that is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support the additions recommended and are pleased to note that they encompass areas that still require more study to increase the number of properties on the register. This demonstrates that the Heritage Register is a living document. We look forward to the addition of properties from neighborhoods currently underrepresented on the register. I would like to ask a question to staff. When the Heritage Register was established, a legal representative of a Ottawa developer said that this was going to be just a tripwire to designation. And I guess I'd like staff to provide an update of the number of demolition applications of building on the register, how many applications there's been, and in how many instances have these applications been approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. I have no problem with relaying that question to staff if they can answer it offhand, or alternatively, if they can't, just having a memo to subcommittee so that we could relay that information.
Just off the top of my head, I believe we're up to 45 60-day notices. So that would be since the Heritage Register began in earnest around 2013. So since 2013, about 45 60-day notices have come in. And out of those, we haven't brought any reports forward to recommend designation yet. However, we have had instances where we've recommended designation potentially. Trying to think, out of the 45, we've also had some staff removals where the 60 days didn't apply. So there have been more than 45 properties removed from the register, but it is quite a small percentage. And I think a lot of the 60-day notices are not coming in because they're reaching out ahead of time, and staff are having a chance to discuss the project with them and encouraging other alternatives, such as additions to the rear or another approach that may allow retention of part of the building. And therefore, we wouldn't be seeing a 60-day notice come in because that only relates to full demolition and not partial demolitions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Fleming, for your question. I think it led to a very insightful answer. Is there any other questions for Mr. Fleming? Seeing none, I just really want to emphasize and congratulate staff, for their work, because the city has spent several years replacing the outdated heritage property lists from the pre-amalgamation governments with a single up-to-date heritage register, and we've heard about some of the numbers. And another number is that the total number of the non-designated listings on the Heritage Register is now currently over 4,500 properties. Really pleased with the amount of work that's been done on the registry. I know my colleagues are as well, and I'm very pleased to support this report. So is this report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. So this report will be submitted to the next city council meeting on July 6th.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Also, whether the committee will carry the technical amendment.
Oh, that's right. So will the committee carry the technical amendment? I jumped the gun there.
Yes, carried.
Carried.
And of course, we carried the report. So thank you so much. And that report, as I had noted, will be submitted to council on July 6th. The next item before us is designation of 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And I understand that Councillor Brockington has a motion on behalf of Councillor Leeper to be introduced.
Thank you, Chair. If we could please post it. I think I'll introduce it and then, or just read it, and then Councillor Leeper will introduce it, if that's okay, Chair?
Absolutely.
Okay. I can dig the motion out, but if we could just post it, that would be great.
It's being posted momentarily, Chair.
So Chair and colleagues, on behalf of Councillor Leeper, I'm just simply reading the motion to the record. So whereas a notice of intention to demolish under the Ontario Heritage Act has been submitted for the house at 501 Cole Avenue, and whereas the Westboro Community Association submitted an application for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act in December 2021, and whereas the building has contextual value for its role in the early development of the Highland Park neighborhood, therefore be it resolved that with respect to the report, the Built Heritage Subcommittee replace recommendation 1 of the staff report with the following. Issue a notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act according to the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value attached as document 4. Be it further resolved that the statement of cultural heritage value on file with the office of the city clerk be attached as document 4 to the report number.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. And of course, we have the affected ward Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, for putting this forward. I hope that all of the members of the subcommittee have the full motion in front of them, because it does contain that statement of cultural heritage value, which is the foundation of the motion that is before you. Just in terms of how we got here, I think we are closing in on, 3/4 of a year or so since the community requested that this property be protected with heritage designation. It was on the heritage registry. It was not yet a development play, and the community feels very strongly that this structure tells an important part of the story of Highland Park, particularly sitting as it does in a cluster of similar style homes and next to the stone cottage. It has a really strong contextual value. And so what the motion that I'm putting in front of you does is to say it has contextual value, and on the basis of that, this subcommittee should recommend it for designation. It's really interesting that we're having this conversation in the context of the discussion we just had around the Heritage Registry. This is a very rare example of a building that is on the Heritage Registry, where we've received a notice of intent to demolish and have pursued it all the way through putting a report in front of the subcommittee with a staff weighing in on whether or not this should be designated with heritage protection. Staff have, and I have to thank them, they've done a great job of taking a look, analyzing the property for its heritage value. And they have said, yes, it does have contextual value, but they don't feel that it meets a bar, I guess, of sufficient contextual value in order to recommend designation. The regulations say that when a property has contextual value, it may be considered for designation. It doesn't say it has to be. We're not going to preserve every old building in Kitchissippi Ward. Properties regularly come up for demolition that I and staff are agreed are not going to hit the bar in order to receive heritage protection designation, and they get demolished. But this one on the registry is worthwhile to keep, even though it is in the vernacular, it is a fairly regular building of which several exist. But when I take a look at the staff report that talk about the fact that there are multiple of these properties that are on the Heritage Registry, I'm also very mindful that being on the Heritage Registry doesn't mean it has to be preserved, and that we regularly demolish homes that are on the Heritage Registry. Highland Park is going to change considerably over the course of the next couple of generations. Kitchissippi Ward is adjacent to, I don't know, I want to say like 5 LRT stations. It's going to intensify. City Council has made that intent clear for neighborhoods like Highland Park, that we need to have intensification there. We have to start preserving some of the homes that tell the story of the old neighborhood. If this committee chooses not, or if this committee chooses to designate this building today, it's not an anti-intensification play. If the developer is able to get permission to demolish this beautiful home, 2 singles will go up, right? We're not talking about a significant intensification, but a couple of generations from now, the cluster of homes that is around this corner of Kenwood and Cole is going to be looked to as a bit of a pause, and it's going to be looked to as a reminder of the work that Cole did to develop this area. And I hope that even though it's a relatively ordinary building, of which today, there are several examples in the ward, despite those facts, we have to start preserving some of this heritage. And I'm hoping that the committee will start that work today, because there are more demolitions in Highland Park to come. So please do read the statement of cultural heritage value that is attached to the motion. And I'll just turn it back over to the chair, and I'm looking forward to hearing the delegations today.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper, for the explanation around the motion to recommend approval of designation. Can staff please provide an overview of the report that was submitted to subcommittee?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So I'll just wait for the slides to come up. This presentation speaks to the designation of 501 coal under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So as noted, this property is listed on the City of Ottawa's Municipal Heritage Register under the authority of Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And this report stems from a notice of intention to demolish the existing building, which triggered the 60-day timeline for review under the Act. And next slide, please. So just to provide some additional context, this property is located near the intersection of Cole Avenue and Kenwood Avenue in Highland Park within Ward 15. It's about 2 blocks south of the main commercial corridor on Richmond Road in Westboro, and it's roughly equidistant between Churchill Avenue to the east and Broadview Avenue to the west. It's also located, as noted, directly adjacent to 420 Kenwood Avenue, which is a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act and known locally as Cobble Cottage. And the photos on the right hand just show some of the images of the property's immediate context. And next slide, please. So I'll just go over this slide briefly, as the previous presentation and some of the discussions beforehand have covered a lot of this material, but I just wanted to give a breakdown on some of the context for this 60-day notice process for properties listed on the Heritage Register. As noted, listed properties have a reduced level of protection compared to designated properties, the only restriction being that a property owner is required to give the city 60 days notice if they intend to demolish. And as noted, the function of this notice period is to give the city an opportunity to review the property in detail before it is demolished and to potentially designate it under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So the city has established procedures for the receipt and review of these demolition notices for listed buildings, which is outlined in the graphic on the screen. Following the receipt of a completed notice, Heritage staff circulate the ward councillor and the chair of BHSC. And at that time, the ward councillor does have the opportunity to request that a report be brought to BHSC, which considers the designation of the property. Following receipt of a completed notice for 501 Cole Avenue, the ward councillor for this property did request that a report be made, and which is why the current item is in front of you today. So next slide, please. So this slide just gives an overview of a timeline of events related to this file. So in the fall of 2021, staff received a request to designate the property from the Westboro Community Association. Staff assisted in completing the designation request form to ensure that it contained sufficient information to be deemed complete. And once received, the request was added to the city's designation request review work plan. The application and information submitted as part of the request were reviewed and consulted as part of the review undertaken for this report. And we do want to extend our thanks to the Community Association for the excellent research and work that they did on that. In April 2022, an application for consent to sever the property was submitted by the current property owner to the Committee of Adjustment. Heritage staff worked with our colleagues in the Committee of Adjustment and requested that the application be adjourned until the 60-day notice period did commence officially. Between April and May of 2022, staff engaged with the property owner to inform them of the requirements for the 60-day notice. Staff have encouraged the property owner to explore alternatives to demolition, such as constructing an addition to the existing building to allow it for its use to be expanded, but were unsuccessful in these discussions. The completed notice of intention to demolish was received on May 9th, 2022, initiating the official 60-day review period. On May 18th, 2022, the consent to sever application was heard again at the Committee of Adjustment and approved conditionally. So 2 conditions on that approval relate directly to this item. First, the 60-day period required by the Ontario Heritage Act must be expired. And second, the building must be demolished and the applicant must provide proof of its demolition prior to consent officially being granted and those conditions being cleared. And finally, on July 8th, 2022, the 60-day notice period will expire and a demolition permit can be officially issued. And next slide, please. So this slide shows an image of the property. It's a 2.5-story vernacular red brick house that displays elements of the Edwardian classicist style. It was constructed between 1913 and 1914, and it's a typical example of some of the larger residences that were constructed in Highland Park in the first quarter of the 20th century. And just to give a bit of a history on Highland Park quickly, it began to be established formally around 1898 when John E. Cole, who was a dairy farmer and a large landowner in the area, began to subdivide lots for sale following the announcement and creation of the Ottawa Electric Railway line that went to Westboro. Larger lots in this area, such as the subject lot, were subject to a number of material and design requirements, and were intended to establish a cohesive and sort of affluent suburban neighborhood. The first owners of this property were the Pert family, and William Pert was a federal public servant and later a Bank of Nova Scotia employee here in Ottawa. In 1931, it was purchased by Albert E. Morris, who was a municipal clerk and treasurer in Nepean and later Ottawa following the annexation of parts of Nepean. And from 1943 to 1964, the property was owned by the Highland Park Baptist Church, which is a congregation formerly located around the corner on Kenwood Avenue. And next slide, please. So this report contains Heritage staff's assessment of 501 Cole, Regulation 0906 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which is set out on the screen in front of you, sets out the criteria against which individual designation is assessed. So properties that meet one of the 3 criteria may be designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So I'll now provide a summarized version of the assessment, but the full assessment is contained as an attachment to the subject report. So next slide, please. So the first criteria is design and physical value. This property is a typical example of a large residence constructed in Highland Park in the early 20th century. Being built in 1913, it's not among the first generation of houses constructed in the area, as subdivision and construction began right around the turn of the century, around 1898 to 1900. And as a vernacular building, the house isn't representative of any one style and doesn't display a high degree of craftsmanship or artistic merit. As such, staff are of the opinion that the house does not meet the criteria for design and physical value under Regulation 0906. The next criteria is historical and associative value. The historical associations of this house are typical for houses of this type in age and are not significant to the wider context of Highland Park. In addition, an architect for this house hasn't been identified, and as such, staff have determined that the property doesn't meet the criteria for historical or associative value, under the Ontario Heritage Act. And the final criteria is contextual value. So through our assessment, we've identified that this property meets 2 of the 3 contextual criteria in Regulation 0906, as it supports the historic character of Highland Park and is visually and historically linked to its surroundings. The property isn't a landmark in the community. And the contextual value of the property lies in it being one of the remaining houses built and designed in alignment with John E. Cole's vision for an affluent, cohesive, and suburban Highland Park neighborhood. Its large lot, front lawn, mature trees, and setback directly reflect this vision of the ideal suburb and the development of Highland Park, and also connect it to other houses constructed in the same time period. However, it's important to note that this contextual or this context will remain legible if this property without this property, and but staff have identified it as meeting this criteria. So next slide, please. And this slide and the next slide just further identify some of the properties that we've identified within the city of Ottawa that also exhibit similar characteristics. So in total, we've identified 21 properties listed on the Heritage Register, an additional number of properties that are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act that do exhibit similar characteristics. So this slide just highlights some of the properties that are listed on the register, including one on Cole Avenue as well. And next slide, please. And then in addition, this is an additional 4 properties that exhibit similar characteristics that are located within some of the city's heritage conservation districts. And next slide, please. So now just to conclude, So as the house at 501 Cole Avenue demonstrates limited historic or architectural value, staff are of the opinion that the property's designation under Part 4 of the Act wouldn't contribute meaningfully to the city's designation program, nor would it address any gaps in regards to associative or community histories not yet represented through heritage designation. While it does meet the contextual criteria for designation under Ontario Regulation 906, staff don't believe that this is a strong candidate for designation under Part 4. The designation process is values-based rather than being based on any numerical scoring systems. And it's the general practice of the City of Ottawa to designate properties under Part 4 of the Act when they do meet more than one of the criteria for designation. Further, given the existing cluster of similarly aged houses near the intersection of Cole and Kenwood, including the aforementioned 420 Kenwood, which is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, the historic context of Highland Park will be maintained despite this potential loss of 501 Cole. Other values embodied by this house, such as it being representative of upper middle class suburban development in the late 19th and early 20th century, are represented in other buildings that are either designated or listed on the city's register, including, as noted, a further 21 listed houses, which display similar physical characteristics. And next slide, please. And while staff aren't recommending to designate this property, we do recognize that Ward 15 is an area of the city facing significant development pressure and that is underrepresented in terms of heritage designations. At this time, the primary way that heritage staff interact with properties in this area is through responses to 60-day demolition notices in the ward, such as the case of the file before you today. However, it is staff's intention to undertake a proactive and more comprehensive review of registered properties in the area going forward and to prioritize our designation program and our work within that accordingly. And next slide, please. So finally, staff have two recommendations as part of this report. The first, we recommend that Bill Heritage Subcommittee recommends that Council not proceed with the issuance of a notice of intention to designate 501 Cole Avenue under Part 4. And second, that Heritage staff are directed to undertake further analysis of properties in Ward 15 listed on the city's Heritage Register to establish that proactive approach for designation under Part 4 of the Act. And next slide, please. So thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Greg, for the presentation. We did receive numerous correspondence on this item, including some correspondence from Heritage Ottawa as well. And we have a number of registered speakers. And the first registered speaker is Heather Mitchell of the Westboro Community Association.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting us speak today. I'm Heather Mitchell. I'm the chair of the Westboro Community Association. Today, you're probably going to hear from some neighbors. You're going to hear from a local historian, and we of the Community Association, which covers hopefully most of our neighborhood. You would also have received many emails by now from neighbors living in the Westboro and Highland Park area. A month or so ago, a neighbor held a meeting that was attended by well over 20 people, plus our wonderful counselor, to discuss the situation and try to figure out what we could do to save this home. We've reached out to the counselor, our local historian, Dave Alston, both of whom responded positively, and they feel the home is worth preserving. I think this speaks to the deep interest and concern the community feels about 501 Cole. I'm really pleased to see staff here who helped us through with our application. Eric, I'm sorry, I've got the name wrong here, but it's I'm really pleased to see him here. Staff really helped us with our application for designation. They do accept it, as you hear, on its standing of merits in the context of Westboro Highland Park, but not sufficiently broad to speak to our city. We do respectfully disagree, which is why we're here today. As it is said, all politics are local. We think that's the same in terms of history and what we determine as our historical assets. You've heard that the home was built in 1913. I won't go over my notes because this has already been covered. I do want to say, though, that it's an important institution to our neighborhood. You'll appreciate that back in the day, there were no community centers or shopping malls. So when it became the manse, when 501 became the manse of the church, it became a great community hub. And they used to hold strawberry socials every spring. And although this sounds very small and local to you, it was apparently for the whole neighborhood, it was a big gathering time. It wasn't the strawberry socials you might hear of now at your local senior center. As I say, it was a place where people came together after a long, hard winter. Everyone gathered to swap stories, share gossip, and probably conduct a little business on the side, I have no doubt. The story of the growth of Westboro is the story of Ottawa's growth as well. So when I say it's local, and as Greg and the staff are a little concerned about whether it contributes to Ottawa's story, well, it sure did, because the growth of this neighborhood very much contributed to Ottawa through all the other stuff, the logging, skied, all the other, but Cole was someone who wanted to develop a middle class. This is this city trying to find its feet to be a capital. The rail was king. 10 years ago, or a number of years ago, you'd had the great fires. The city was struggling to become a capital, and John Cole was helping with that. And Westboro seems to be very important to Ottawa right now. We are, along with Centertown and some of our other urban neighborhoods, we are being asked to intensify, which we're very happy to do. And as Jeff has pointed out, this has nothing to do with intensification. The issue here strictly is we'd like to preserve the home. We also want to point out that in the recommendation, staff admit that the heritage building stock is under threat in Kitchissippi Ward. And there are 335 listed heritage buildings, but only a handful of designations. And we have no HCD. And yet they won't approve coal to preserve coal. So we'd very much like to have coal preserved because of its merits to us in the community, because it's an institution in the community. But we'd also like to work with Greg and the staff to work on this, do more work in our neighborhood so that you as this committee are presented with less of these ad hoc applications. So we're standing by to work with heritage staff, and we hope that you will agree that more work needs to be done in our ward. So we really, truly appreciate that. And Greg, sorry, that was the name I was looking for. So Greg did help us with our application, and very much appreciated with that, and all the work we've done with that staff has done to help us. So please consider the delegations that will be before you today. As I say, it's local, but it's important to us, and we feel we really can count on you. We hope we can count on you to designate this house. It has great value to us in the community. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. I see that your ward councillor, Councillor Leeper, has raised his hand to ask you a question.
I really just wanted to say there's not much more I can add. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that.
And thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for your delegation. The next registered speaker on the list is Murray Chowan of Novatech.
Thank you, Chair King. I'm wondering if Ms. Harris could speak before me, and then I could follow up. She's listed as your third speaker.
Sure, I'll definitely permit that. So Ms. Harris, please go ahead.
Thank you very much.
And I guess we'll wait to have staff promote her to a panelist.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
You can.
Okay, thank you. I think my video is turned off, but that may be me, but that's all right. So I'm a heritage consultant and public historian with about 34 years of full-time experience in heritage conservation. I'm also a member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals, and I've been qualified as an expert witness at OMB LPAT hearings. And I've served as a former member of the Conservation Review Board, albeit only in 2009 to 2011. In this statement, I'm going to address specifically the issue of whether or not 501 Cole Avenue holds sufficient cultural heritage value or interest to be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the OHA. Specifically using the criteria known as Regulation 906, which are the criteria used by the city. And I'm going to apply evidence relevant to contextual value only, which is the third group of criteria and the one that is being discussed here today. I agree with the city that the designation is not warranted for 501 Cole Avenue, but I'd go further and say that even using contextual value is not warranted. While 501 Cole Avenue has a connection with the cluster of houses, which was used in the document that I've seen, and I have not seen the proposed statement of cultural heritage value, the area in question, in my opinion, would be Highland Park as laid out in 1898 that includes 9 city blocks. This area includes old, not so old, and many new buildings, including dozens of new buildings sharing the block with 501 Cole. Criterion 3.1 asks whether the property is important in defining, maintaining, or supporting the character of an area. When considering designations that reference this criteria, the Conservation Review Board, whose functions are now integrated into LPAT, has issued several reports that address this criterion. I will reference only one due to the time I have. In its recommendation for 65 Ward Street South in Port Hope, the board determined that, quote, the immediate vicinity, excluding the school, appears to be an area of mixed housing of various ages and styles. Thus, it is difficult to discern how the property defines, keeps, or supports the character of the area. As a result, the review board found, that's the end of the quote, that this criterion was not met. In looking at the area myself using Google Street View, the area in Port Hope, the area is even less mixed than the Highland Park subdivision. With respect to CRB designations of 1325, 1351, and 1365 Bayview Avenue in Toronto, it was also determined that the area had evolved substantially and that this criterion was not met. In my opinion, the same concerns would be raised by LPAT in designating 501 Cole Avenue because the character of the area has changed so much with housing of various ages and styles. And this is a residential area, so it's the quality, the age, and the appearance of the residential buildings that really make a difference. So in my analysis, I really agree with the city that, especially in this case, that meeting the issue of contextual value, even if it were met, is not sufficient for designation of this building. And I would like to have seen the drafted statement of cultural heritage value in case there were other points that I could have discussed in my short time here, but I think I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? And I do see that Councillor Leeper has raised his hand.
Thank you. Sorry, trying to find that button. So Ms. Harris, I think where I would disagree with you, and I just want to make sure that I understand the point that you've put forward. You visited the site, I assume, and taken a look at the streets.
I have. I've driven the streets, walked the streets, and reviewed them again on Google Street View. But yeah, of course. So
I believe, and certainly the community believes, that there is a coherence. There is still a recognizable coherence of development in Highland Park. It doesn't look like every other neighborhood in Ottawa. I think it continues to look distinctively Highland Park. And maintaining this building is an important part of keeping that touchstone to what Highland Park looked like, without going so far as to try to preserve every building exactly in its current state. I think your fundamental disagreement is that you do not believe that there is a coherence in the Highland Park area that continues through to this day, that it's changed too much.
The point, you really have to look at it from the perspective of whether or not designation is warranted in spite of all those changes. And my argument would be that I believe that any review of a potential designation would come to the same conclusion that contextual value, there is contextual value to a certain extent with the cluster, but not with the area. The area has changed. I believe, I'd have to go back and count it, but I believe about 60% of the properties on that block are contemporary. So, and then when you go to the further the streets, not only are there more new houses, but the actual type of houses that were built are not reflective of the type of house that is present at 501 Cole. 501 Cole is a very conservative house built in 1913 to 14. There are houses, you know, of a different era and a different quality that are part of, quote, the original subdivision, in the sense they're the first houses built on those lots as subdivided for the creation of a very simple and basic subdivision. There's no parks associated with that subdivision. Highland Park was a, you know, it's a name to pretend there's a park.
We're not probably going to agree, but I do have a fundamental disagreement that there isn't a continued coherence to the Highland Park neighborhood in Westboro today, of which it is important that we preserve some of those touchstones to continue to guide architects moving forward in future. But I don't think we'll agree. I appreciate your intervention, Ms. Harris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands raised, so thank you, Ms. Harris. And the next registered speaker is Murray Chowan.
So, thank you very much, Chair King. You and many of the members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee know that I'm a professional planner. I don't profess to be a heritage expert. As a professional planner, you know, I rely on the expertise of environmentalists when dealing with endangered species and natural heritage features. I rely on the advice of geotechnical engineers when dealing with soil conditions and slope stability. I rely on the expertise of arborists when discussing the ability to save trees. I rely on the expert on wind and noise consultants. I rely on the expertise of transportation engineers. And today I rely on the expertise of heritage consultants and heritage staff. You've heard from Ms. Harris that firstly, she agrees with staff that it shouldn't be designated, but she also questions whether this property even meets the contextual criteria set out in the regulations. I find it interesting, I think, that there's tremendous pressure on the committee today to designate this building as a heritage structure. I note that there are, I would guess, easily half a dozen similar properties within Kitchissippi Ward and maybe even within Highland Park that are on the Heritage Register. There were several added as a result of your recommendation on report 2 this morning. If this property is going to be designated as a heritage property, then I would expect that all those other properties listed on the Heritage Register in Highland Park and Kitchissippi Ward would similarly be designated. And that, I believe, is the problem facing the committee today. Your staff have indicated in their report that, quote, in general, the practice of the City of Ottawa is to designate properties under Port 4 of the OHA when they meet more than one of the criteria for designation. And I think that statement in the staff report is critically important, simply because this property might meet the criteria for contextual value doesn't warrant designation by the City of Ottawa under the Act. That is your practice in the past. It should be your practice today, and it should be your practice going forward. I would urge the committee to accept the recommendations from staff and not designate the property under the Heritage Act. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Any questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. The next registered speaker is Dave Alston.
Hi, good morning. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity, and I thank you for your time and listening to us speakers. I'm a local historian and writer here in West Ottawa, and with a focus on Kitchissippi and including Westboro, and some of my work is actually even cited in the report. So I've written letters of support and spoken at a few committee meetings in the past, and I've reserved speaking in person for when I feel strongly about a potential lost heritage home. And in this case, I feel especially strongly about coming out to support 501 Cole Avenue. And to urge designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. My focus is going to be on the contextual value of the house, but I do have other comments as well. I think this is an absolutely important house to the community of Highland Park, and more importantly, its history. This house is what we think of when we think of the character of Westboro. That appeals to so many prospective home buyers, and sadly, that character is changing as we were just discussing, but it's certainly not to retain some of that traditional character so that we can at least have a healthy mix of the old and new in Westboro before all the old is gone. And this is the opportunity that we have today. Westboro at the turn of the 20th century had only 200 residents, and then the streetcar line came, and suddenly the land became valuable, and farmers laid out subdivision plans over the farms, and residents picked the new name of Westboro in 1899 to appeal. So the Highland Park Dairy Farm had been Thomas Cole's business in the late 19th century, but his son John saw the value in converting it into a residential district. But notably, he wanted to become a prominent higher class area, and he instituted strict building restrictions to make that happen. And 501 Cole is to me a perfect example of such a building that Cole would have admired with pride when he walked past from his home down on Richmond Road. In the first few decades of the 1900s, there was a building boom in Westboro, and in the north half of the community, there was an array of cottages that were built along the water. It became one of the first sort of cottage summer resort areas. But on the south half, there was the professionals of Ottawa that were building prominent houses. So fast forward just 14 years, in 1914, when the house was completed, there was exactly 520 structures in Westboro. That's according to the old assessment roll of 1914. The Pert House at 501 Cole is one of those houses, and my estimate is there's less than 150 of these houses remaining in Westboro, and that number continues to dwindle every year. The house is especially unique, and the report goes through all the reasons why, and it has contextual value in its prominent location of the neighborhood. It's a solid and impressive build, and it has a unique and interesting history like all the houses, the stories that they each tell. It also is a bit unique in that it's a solid brick, solid masonry house. It's not just a brick veneer house, but and one of only a handful of examples left in Westboro. Anyway, rest of my comments, I want to speak to recommendation 2 of the staff report regarding proactivity. And to me, there's a significant lack of proactivity in heritage asset management in Ottawa. We use the Heritage Register as a bit of a crutch almost, and I'm glad it exists, and staff have done exemplary work in the last 6 years getting updated, but it's barely better than having nothing at all. I see it more of a list of death row inmates where you can get a 60-day stay of execution, but in almost all cases, the governor isn't calling and giving you a pardon at the end. It's going to be another demolished house. And the lack of proactivity is painful. The current system is not fair equally to the unsuspecting homeowner or the community who's going to suddenly lose a valuable home. And it takes a substantial amount of time, effort, and expertise in a very short time frame by community members who shouldn't even have the onus on them to put all this together on their own. But this is how it is, and my kudos to the Westboro CA for investing their precious time and effort into saving 501 Cole, and hopefully the committee members are aware of the amount of work put into this. I also work as the Heritage Asset Lead for National Defence, and whenever a building hits 50 years of age, we go to FIBRO and we review it, and we have a definite answer going forward that all parties can operate under. In Ottawa, we have nothing. We have no standards, we have no benchmarks, no milestones. We don't even really have a reliable date of construction dates pre-World War II, right? So we can wait around for the city to develop a system and become proactive, which is I sincerely hope they can, and we'd love to even assist on doing. But in the meantime, we're left with the system we have, which is a mad scramble to protect those buildings that are important to save for the community. And so since this is the only system we have, I find the recommendation 2 almost offensive, and then it's not okay to just say goodbye to this house and we'll fix it later. If you read some of the heritage reports from the 80s and 90s, they make the same promises about proactivity and the need for a system. City Heritage Planning, it's a small team. They don't and never have had the time or resources to implement a thorough system. And like everywhere else, it seems heritage is not and never will be a top priority for the city to administer. The house is important to the area, and so this is our opportunity to be proactive and serve as deserving heritage buildings. And the work put in by the CA demonstrates that. In view that is likely many ways away, if ever, that we see a FIBRO-like system of heritage asset management in Ottawa, it's not fair to simply discard houses that absolutely would be strongly considered for designation in a proactive system as an excellent representative sample of an important area of our neighborhood's development. There's only a handful of designated buildings in Westboro and just one house south of Richmond Road. That's completely insufficient and dangerous. Once this house is gone, we can't wish it back. We can't bring it back. I have a list of buildings I wish we could bring back, but they're gone. And the opportunity now is to do the right thing, preserve 501 Cole so that future generations can continue to enjoy the home and the tangible history that displays, like a living museum of Highland Park right in the middle of the neighborhood. So I feel it's hope for that designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Your time has expired, but you do have a question from Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. And Dave, you write a column, I think, well, I know, for the Kitchissippi Times outlining the history of the neighborhood. What is the reaction you get to that column every month?
It's fantastic. So I've been doing this for 8 years now, writing a monthly column on the history of local history, and people love it. It's by far the most well clicked on popular column in the paper. And the surgence of interest in local history and knowledge is astounding compared to even how it was 10, 15 years ago. And people love learning about that bits of history in their community, and that the amount of old history, like the original touch points, is quickly disappearing. We don't have that anymore. And so people appreciate to know, wow, we have this house here that was, here before World War I, and that this, all the history tied to it, you lose that when it's gone. And I think that, the more that's lost, that character of Westboro is lost. And so based on what I hear from people, it's important to have that last bits that we have to stay or to be kept.
Is that history alive in Westboro, or does it just live in your column?
It is alive in the neighborhood, but it's disappearing quickly. Every time we pull down an older building, especially one that means so much and has that unique history to the area, it's lost. Yeah. And so I do my best with the writing of it about it, and there's a few books and stuff, but it's not the same as being able to actually see that tangible piece of history.
Now, Ms. Harris has asserted that the neighborhood has changed so much that there's no contextual value. I've disagreed with her in that I believe there is a coherence in Highland Park that continues to be alive and real and felt today. But how do you address Ms. Harris's assertion of context to what, I guess, is what she's asking?
Right. Well, I feel the same. I feel the same as you. I question that. I think that gives it all the more reason to need to preserve the remaining bits of history. I can relate to my national defense work in that if we felt that way about, say, well, we have all new airplanes and all new hangars, so why would we keep our World War I hangars in Borden? Well, I say all the more reason we need to keep those hangars, because this is our last bit of history from that era. And that's what we're looking for, a representative example that people can look at and say, wow, this is from 1913. And I love that it's part of a little cluster at the corner. It's like I said, almost like a living museum. So I think it's all the more important because of the changing fabric of the neighborhood.
Amazing. Dave, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Dave, for your deputation. Much appreciated this morning. We also have Dave Muir, who is also here. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee to make a submission on behalf of the neighborhood and the neighbors, in this case, of 501 Cole, and then to be able to speak to that submission, which is what I'll do this morning. I'd also like to mention and thank the city staff, in particular, Mr. McPherson, for the report that was prepared under a fairly tight timeline because it did contain considerable amount of valuable information that I think can be used, as Councillor Leeper said, to make the case to preserve this property. I wanted to begin with the last part of my letter, which was really addressed why did my wife and I, this letter came from my wife and I, choose to take the time to write to the committee, and why did I put my hand up to speak at this committee? Because I think that's important too, and goes to some of the comments that have been made in support of preservation of 501 Cole. In Highland Park, we have a very deep sense of family, of friendship, of community within Highland Park. It's the kind of neighborhood that people come to for whatever reason, but they stay. They stay because of the nature of the neighborhood, including its historical touch points, and I'll talk really briefly about my own experience as I lead into 501 Cole. But we have these deep roots, and we firmly believe that there's a connection between those deep roots that have taken hold in Highland Park and the vision of people like John Cole. John Cole set out to create an enduring community that was affluent and cohesive and had many of the aspects that Mr. McPherson canvassed in his report. And I believe he succeeded. And I think there's a strong connection between the vision of historical builders like John Cole and the communities that exist today and the attitude of the people that live within those communities. So it was with that in mind that my wife and I felt strongly enough to write this subcommittee and me appear today. Our own personal experience, we've been in the community for 38 years. We first moved, my wife and I, shortly after we were married. We bought our first house. It was on Ravenhill Avenue. It's a turn of the century semi-detached house across from the Lawn Bowling Club, if you're familiar with the neighborhood. And that really piqued our interest because it was a historic property. It piqued our interest in the history of the neighborhood. As our family began to arrive, that house became too small, and we ended up just around the corner on Cole Avenue at 501 Cole, and our house sits directly opposite, or we were at 504, sorry, our house sits directly opposite 501. And the view that we have every day from our front porch and or as we walk out to the road is precisely the view that you can see in the pictures that have been shown of the property. It's a beautiful property, and it would be a shame in our view for more reasons other than historic, and in addition to the historic reasons, if we were to lose that property. Not only are we across from 501 Cole, we're kitty corner with the cobblestone cottage, which has been mentioned and canvassed in the report as well. And next door to us is another large historic home that is on the Heritage Register. So we're sitting right in the, I guess, in the center of the so-called cluster at the corner of Kenwood and Cole. We raised our family there, and our family made friends. We made friends, lifelong friends, and things came full circle about a year ago when my daughter and her family acquired a house in Highland Park, and now her family, including our grandchildren, will also be raising a family and staying in Highland Park.
And David, just wanted you to know that your time has expired, but I'll let you wrap up.
Oh, 5 minutes is up?
Yes.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay, I'll wrap up. Oh, very sorry then. I'll wrap up by saying that I think 501 Cole is unique amongst the cluster of properties. I don't think you can capture a vision of a founder for a cohesive neighborhood with a single property. I think you need to capture that with a group of properties. 501 Cole is very distinctive in terms of that cluster. I'm familiar with them all, and I think the committee has an opportunity to protect this property because you have a report in front of you which says that it meets the requirement of the Ontario regulation. Properties are disappearing very fast in our neighborhood, and there's an opportunity now to protect this one. I would encourage you to take it. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, and Councillor Liepert does have a question for you.
Thanks. And David, thank you very much for the intervention. The key question has been posed by some is it has contextual value, but contextual value to what? And we both know that a lot of the properties around Highland Park have changed. The styles of the homes are different than what they were. I guess I would ask you the same question I asked Dave, which is there still a context in Highland Park, despite the intensification that's taking place, that is worthy of highlighting with the preservation of buildings like this?
Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Leeper. Absolutely, the particular house is beside an existing heritage house and around the corner from a historic property from which that it's associated with the Baptist church. Though that particular cluster of houses is worth in our view preserving.
Okay, David, thank you very much for coming out today.
And thank you as well, David, for your submission.
Thank you.
And our last registered speaker on this item is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Well, Mr. Chair, 3 Daves in a row. Perhaps we should start a doo-wop group or something. Heritage Ottawa is disappointed that staff do not recommend this property despite having contextual value for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. The property is located in an area that is underrepresented in both Part 4 and designations and has no Part 5 designations. It is unfortunate that the community's efforts to retain this building were not given more recognition in the ultimate decision that the house, which contributes to the heritage fabric of the neighborhood, will be demolished. We are, however, encouraged by the second recommendation, which seeks a proactive approach to undertake further analysis of heritage register properties in Ward 15. We hope that you will reconsider the recommendation of staff on this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And I see that Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Thanks. And just to clarify your comments, David, you do feel that it is worthy of designation and that the contextual value is strong enough that it qualifies.
Yes, we do. We think it's very close, and I think that a lot of the arguments that have been put forward by Julie Harris and Dave Alston, I think are very legitimate ones, and I think it shows the difficulty sometime of the city trying to resolve the pull between designation and modernization and intensification in communities. But I think it's this is one that I think that staff have not dropped the ball, but I think they're making the wrong recommendation on, and we would support that it be reviewed. Thank you.
If I read between the lines of the report, there are multiple properties of this type, in the area. I guess the question I would have for heritage advocates in the city is, should we just wait until it's the last one before we finally designate?
Well, in dealing in heritage in the city for 20 years, I can remember lots of instances where that rationale has been used, that, oh, it's very typical, or it's very typical of buildings in other parts of the city. But I think what we're looking at in this case is a coherent community. And I think a community that we do not have a lot of designations, certainly not Part 5 designations that reflect this. It's we just finished doing Heritage Conservation District Plan approval for Centertown and Minto Park, and they are some of the older districts in the city. I would think that Westboro is fast becoming an important community that should be considered using that same criteria that we use for Lower Town, for Sandy Hill, and for Centertown. And I think this is a golden opportunity for us to start that sort of recognition.
Wonderful. David, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Councillor Leeper. Does the committee have any questions for staff, seeing that that our third David was the last registered speaker? And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has her hand raised first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much to staff for the presentation, and to members of the community and others who have come out to speak today. It's very appreciated. My question pertains to, obviously, this cluster of buildings. I'm thinking about, obviously, the cobblestone cottage is designated, but the other buildings, the other houses that make up this small but clearly important cluster, I ask myself, if each one of these other houses were considered individually, as we are considering 501 Cole, would we find ourselves in the same situation where they, from staff's perspective, don't quite meet the level of to qualify for designation, so that each one individually on its own, in staff's view, would result in a recommendation to proceed with demolition? So at what point do you pick off each contributing factor to an important cluster where you essentially, you no longer have the cluster? So my question really is, if staff could comment on, minus Cobblestone Cottage, perceptions of the other houses that make up the cluster.
Thank you for the question. I think just to start off, we haven't done that level of analysis to comment on each individual property that does make up that cluster. But to point back to recommendation 2, that is, largely the intention within that recommendation is to undertake some of that proactive work so that we do have a better understanding of what resources exist in the area, and potentially are able to move to designation prior to 60-day notices coming in where appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I may have another follow-up, but that's it for now. Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. There's a motion in front of us that includes on page 2 a cultural heritage impact statement. And I was wondering if staff see anything in that statement that they would disagree with, or is not factual, is an error in that cultural statement.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to clarify, sorry, do you mean the statement of cultural heritage value that's attached?
Yes, okay. That's correct. Page 2 of the motion.
Thank you. No, I wouldn't say that there is any factual disinformation with that statement. I think that's sort of the subjective nature of some of these designations, is that certain characteristics can be identified as part of a designation by depending on who is conducting that research and how it's contextualized.
And I know that the criteria are subjective, and we don't use a scoring system in order to arrive at a conclusion or recommendation. Would you say, was this close to meeting the requirements, or how close was this to meeting the typical requirements? Can you give us some idea?
Yeah, so I think I can pass this one over to Leslie briefly to sort of speak more to some of the, I think, broader program implications, but staff spent a really significant amount of time assessing this property and trying to understand the implications of that contextual value. So I will say that there was a lot of deliberation, and I think a lot of back and forth, both among staff and then with myself as well when I was undertaking that review.
Thanks, Greg. Just maybe to add on to that, I think, as was noted, we did undertake a detailed review of this property. I would say that it is close in that staff have acknowledged that it does meet one of the 3 criteria under the Act. But if we compare it to the other designated properties on the city's Heritage Register, it doesn't quite meet that bar in staff's opinion. So while the committee and council would be well within their ability to designate this building because it does meet one of the 3 criteria, it's staff's opinion that it doesn't meet the bar for what we consider to be significant as part of the designation program.
Okay, thanks very much. That's helpful. This is a close call. I've spent quite a bit of time reading and rereading the report and the supporting documents, and I think Councillor Leeper, on behalf of the community, makes a very good case as to why it should. So this will be a tough call for committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. The next person with their hand raised is Member Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the discourse today has been concerning, as Carolyn had pointed out, this cluster of properties and their contributing value and 501 Coal's role within that cluster. In the current staff report, the recommendation is to investigate other properties for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Is there any intent by city staff to look at Part 5 designation for areas more broadly within this ward?
I can take this question. At this point in time, we haven't identified any areas in particular for Part 5 designation, but I do think through that recommendation too, I think a proactive approach to designation in general is the goal here. So identifying properties and potentially areas that may merit designation under the Act. So I think the initial goal, because what we're normally dealing with is one-off demolitions at this point in time, is to sort of make a list of what we think are working with the community, what we and the community think are the most significant buildings within the area, and approach them on a one-by-one basis. However, I don't think we're limited to that if clusters of properties arise where Part 5 designation might be appropriate.
Thank you, Leslie.
And thank you, Member Hassel. The last person with their hand raised is Member Podolsky.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions for staff. The first is, having listened to the discussion and read the reports very carefully, was there a dialogue with the property owner about the potential to intensify the property by adding to the side of the building and the rear of the building in order to achieve the intensification objective that the property owner obviously seeks to carry out? So that's question number 1.
Yes, so that was a discussion with the property owner. It was ultimately something that they were not interested in pursuing.
A second question then, and that is in the proposed severance, which would be granted meeting the conditions that were given, did the property owner illustrate architecturally the two houses that were to be built to assess whether they are, and have they been assessed to be informally to be compatible with the cluster of houses that are there?
So as part of the Committee of Adjustment application, a proposed design wasn't submitted as part of that. The application in question was just a consent to sever. But I do believe that the 2 properties or the 2 buildings that are proposed, as well as the actual proposed lots, would meet all the zoning requirements for the area. So it wouldn't actually trigger any sort of review of that nature.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't see any any other hands except Councillor Leeper, and I am moving on to comments. So I don't know if this is questions or comments, but it could be either.
Or a question for staff. 486 Coal has also been given demolition permission, I believe, right?
Yes, I believe so. I will have to double check it though, Councillor.
Yeah. And I guess the question is, do we just continue to let these buildings be demolished one by one without trying to preserve the context that is the value of this building? It just strikes me as a march, and putting the buildings on the heritage register clearly doesn't protect them absolutely, which is the point that we were making to the delegates in the previous discussion item around additions to the register. At what point do you say we don't have enough of these houses left to establish a context to protect?
I think that's why we've put in recommendation 2 in this instance, because we are seeing an acceleration in the number of 60-day notices that we're receiving in this area. And I think there are also potentially buildings located in this neighborhood that haven't yet been added to the register that perhaps should be. And there were several of them included in the report for additions to the heritage register that was item 2 on this agenda. So what staff is hoping to do through recommendation 2 is to take a broader approach where we're looking at, you know, this question that came up earlier of, do we wait until there's only one left and then designate that? That is not the goal. The goal is to look at sort of the themes of history throughout Kitchissippi Ward and figure out which buildings are the best representation of those themes of history. And doing it on a sort of ad hoc one-off basis makes it much more difficult and sort of to try to understand which are the most important buildings. So that is the staff position on recommendation 2, and that we would identify properties for designation through that recommendation.
But shouldn't this one sort of rise to the top of that list because of its proximity to the heritage designated cobble cottage?
That definitely factored into the discussion, and I think, as Councillor Gower noted, this is a close call on this property. Staff have acknowledged that the building does have value, the property does have value. It is, but it is staff's position that it doesn't sort of meet that bar for designation.
Okay. I'll take this opportunity to say thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you very much, Greg. You've both helped me out a lot through this process, and I do appreciate the professionalism with which you've approached a very contentious issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Member Podolsky.
Yes, Chair, I have some comments on this prior to our vote. The first is that I really do appreciate the thorough work that staff has done and their recommendation against recommendation. I think that what we all need to appreciate on a citywide basis is that, like in primary school system or even university school system, there is a phenomenon called grade inflation. And I think that it's something that I recognize staff and Heritage Ottawa and others have been addressing for many, many years, and that is the issue of, shall we say, designation deflation. That the gap between those that have been designated that have the highest level of excellence, historic value, architectural value, contextual value, is eroded somewhat as we expand the number of designations under Part 4 that include the marginal ones that erode the standards of the City of Ottawa in its approach to recognizing the heritage of our community. On the other hand, I am very, very mindful and appreciate the sentiment which the local community has and the work that has been done, and also recognize, as others do, that there is a gray area, that the bar is not fixed. And the bar can shift. The bar as to designation or not designation varies year by year. And I'm willing to, shall we say, share the community's concern in what is of important matters in a local community. And for those of you who remember the play Two Pianos, Four Hands, the two aspiring concert pianists at the end of the play say, well, we may not have made it to Juilliard and our great concert pianists, but we're the best on our block. And I think that this is a case that this is of the best on the block, and therefore I'm persuaded to vote in favor of the designation.
Thank you, Member Podolsky. And I see that Councillor Leeper has raised his hand.
Thanks. And just by way of my last comments, I want to echo what Barry just spoke about in terms of a bar that moves. And I want to caution against setting the bar too high. This is an ordinary house in a neighborhood that is, it's not famous, but our history is not just the capital city history, in which we are very interested in the buildings in which Sir Wilfrid Laurier slept, and the buildings that are designed by famous architects, and the technical and the scientific design merit of world-leading buildings. Ottawa also has a very ordinary history of people who lived here and worked in the government, who worked in lumber, who are today working in tech, who are leading ordinary lives. And that history is important to preserve in the neighborhoods that were built in order to house these folks. And I think if we lose this 501 coal, we're going to lose a connection to an ordinary neighborhood and ordinary lives who are actually the people who built this city. Let's not set the bar so high that we forget the ordinary but very important history of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments as ward councillor. And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has also raised her hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to add my voice to the comments and to say that I will not be, no, I don't know if we could, how this works when there's the recommendation is in two parts. I certainly support part two of the second recommendation, but I do not support staff's recommendation that the house not be, does not qualify for designation. And I say that because I fall back onto the cluster concept as we've been talking about, and the role this significant but not necessarily outstanding example of a type contributes. And I have an echo of a staff's former colleague, which many of us remember fondly, Stuart Lazier, saying that once you pull a certain number of teeth out of a smile, you no longer have the smile. And you cannot end up with a cobblestone cottage left to speak to what was clearly for the community and for the history of Highland Park and the goals of John Cole, were what that area reflects. And so I think I will say with confidence that this almost made it in my estimation, especially in this area, which is in need of conservation examination. This is a good example for us to start in the right direction and proceed with designation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So just for clarity, we have a motion that replaces the first clause, which would seek a designation. So if you were for designation, you'd be voting for this motion. We have Councillor Brockington with his hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, in addition to the delegations that we heard and members of the subcommittee, I'll just say simply this. Even when a decision is close, because there are merits to both sides of this argument, I'm going to acknowledge that this is not a slam dunk in either case. Ask yourself this question: what is the role of the Built Heritage Subcommittee? Is it to allow a home to be demolished, or should we be preserving, making recommendations to preserve? And I think you err on the side of caution and you vote to preserve the history of this home and this neighborhood as well when it's that close. If you are on the line and are concerned about which way to vote, sort of my default is to preserve. This is the Built Heritage Subcommittee, and I think we have an additional role above planning or even council to put heritage certainly on the front burner. So for me, I think there have been some strong arguments made by the community. There's certainly strong community support for this preservation, and I will be voting in favor of the Brockington-Leeper motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Any other comments? Seeing none, I would closely associate my comments with some of my colleagues, including Councillor Brockington. I think that we've been hearing concerns from the community, and we've heard concerns from the ward councillor about ensuring that we maintain a coherent community in this neighborhood, and that's very important. We also have to note that the contextual value as evaluated is subject to subjective criteria, and I think that's important to understand. I do applaud the work and the in-depth work that Heritage staff has undertaken, and I think it's been very important, very insightful. But I am compelled to think that there might have been more of a focus from what we've heard from community members around the historical and associative value, especially around the use of the property as a church meant. I think we heard that from community members, and I'm not certain that was reflected as much as I would have if I subjectively was looking at this file. Of course, I'm not a professional, so I don't want to as well discount the input of staff, but I think that that's actually quite important. And I think it's also important to note that there's major importance to Heritage staff's second recommendation, which in my mind speaks to the need for appropriate rationales for designation. We know in that second recommendation, it notes that notices of intention to demolish buildings listed on the city's heritage register are more frequent in Ward 15, as the ward contains 335 listed heritage buildings alongside only a handful of designations under the Ontario Heritage Act. And the report also noted that in addition, Ward 15 does not contain any heritage conservation districts or cultural heritage character areas. We know that the area is being rapidly intensified. It's rapidly intensifying, and the heritage building stock is at risk of being lost over time. We know that the current approach is that heritage planning staff react to notices of intention to demolish on a case-by-case basis within a 60-day time limit. And given the city's essential role in heritage conservation and the rich history of Kitchissippi, and given designation provides clarity as to the cultural importance of a given property and that it is worthy of ongoing care and protection, all items that I am quoting and agree with in recommendation 2, I believe that heritage designation is warranted in the case of 501 Cole. I think it's important for us to look at more elements around the historical and associative contexts of heritage attributes. And as we know, designation provides for a consistent approach to heritage conservation, which I think we should be leaning towards. And I also agree with what Councillor Brockington was saying, that above and beyond our legislative mandate, I think that we are here to preserve. And it does help ensure heritage conservation. It does help to ensure that alterations in the case of an individual property or development in districts are consistent with the overall intent of the designation bylaw. So I believe if we're planning for a future for strong, vibrant communities, we do require knowledge of the past and understanding of what we value in the present. Existing building structures and landscapes often define a community's unique identity and give it character and a sense of place. And designation really does help to guide this change. I think that we have to really utilize it in a sense liberally in order to recognize the importance of this property to the local community, to protect the property's cultural heritage value, to encourage good stewardship and conservation, and to promote knowledge and understanding of the property. As a consequence, especially of the lack of heritage conservation elements in Ward 15, as was outlined by staff, along with increasing loss of building stock, I'll be voting in favor of this replacement motion, which recommends designation. So I guess the primary question is, do we need to go to a vote, or is the report carried?
Carried.
Chair, if I could clarify, is it the intent of the committee to vote on the amending motion first?
Yes, sorry. So voting on the amending motion.
Carried.
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 Thank you. So this report will be submitted to council. The report will proceed, to Planning Committee on June 23rd. Thank you for that. And with the committee's indulgence, I'm hoping that the committee would be willing to consider the application to alter 70 Nicholas Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act first before we go to Somerset House, simply because the ward councillor, Councillor Fleury, is joining us and has limited time. This item also was going to be on consent, with the addition of a motion that Councillor Fleury was bringing to council through to subcommittee, I believe through Councillor Brockington. So I'm just seeking consent of the committee to just slightly change our agenda here so that we could expedite this item and then move on to Somerset House. And I see every people are in agreement, so that's fine. So we can proceed with application to alter 70 Nicholas Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I believe there's a motion. I don't believe that we had a presentation on this item.
Chair, I'm in your hands. Would you, I believe Councillor Brockington, who's a member of committee, has accepted to move it. Would you like me to read it in record, or want Councillor Brockington to read it?
I think it'd be fine if you read it into the record. I'm sure Councillor Brockington would be amenable to that, and I'll just ask.
Would you mind pulling it up?
I'll ask staff to bring that up.
So members of the committee, were just to provide additional context, we're talking about the Rideau Centre. As you know, the Rideau Centre had gone through a recent expansion, which included a heritage property at the Ogilvy building, corner of now Ogilvy Square, but formerly Nicholas Street and Rideau. And as they move further south on their property, there is the registry building at the corner of Daly and Nicholas. And they're, as part of their redevelopment, they're looking to reposition that property in a dominant segment of, or dominant corner, if you will, of that site at the corner of Daly. So they have a short timelines to do this work, and there's a number of restrictions prior to June in terms of the work that could be conducted. So what you see in front of you is basically a request that this item be moved to council on June 22nd, which is this Wednesday. So therefore, be it resolved with respect to the report, the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend council approve the following. 1, consider the Built Heritage Subcommittee report on this matter at council of June 22nd, and 2, suspend the notice required under subsection 29 and 34 of the procedural bylaw to consider this report at this meeting on June 22nd in order to allow the applicant to relocate the heritage building in good weather condition. And Chair, we're in good hands, but just to make sure, I know that Member Podolsky is doing work on this on behalf of the applicants. I believe he's has a conflict on this item. So I just want to make sure that, because we're just landing this item, that there's no surprises here.
Absolutely, and Member Podolsky actually declared that conflict of interest at the beginning of the meeting. I do know that Aaron Cameron from Cadillac Fairview is in attendance. If this item carries, do you need to speak to it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that Aaron Cameron, who is representing the applicant team, had another engagement. So I'm here representing the applicant team to meet. And if this carries, no, we do not need to speak to this item if carried.
Okay, thank you so much. So is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Chair, if I could just confirm whether the committee is also carrying the motion to recommend that council consider this motion on Wednesday.
Yes, I believe that was the item before us.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to confirm. So the motion's carried and the report is also carried then, if I understand correctly.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Thank you. We can now return to the update on Somerset House, 352 Somerset Street West. And I believe that staff has a report for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's going to be me giving the presentation today. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. The presentation today is related to the information report before the committee on Somerset House at 352 Somerset Street West. At the May 11th City Council meeting, Council directed staff to provide an update on the building and action that was being undertaken at the next Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting. So while I'm giving this presentation today, ongoing work on the file is a team effort on behalf of all city staff, on the part of all city staff. So while I have a team of colleagues here from Heritage, Building Code, Bylaw, and Legal Services to assist me in answering any questions the committee might have on this file. Next slide, please. This slide provides a high-level timeline of activity on the file since the initial collapse in 2007. Over the following 9 years after the collapse, there were several applications under the Ontario Heritage Act, as well as many building code orders and requests for service to our bylaw colleagues. Of the several applications and pre-consultations that took place over the years, only one application was acted on, and that was for the demolition of the east wing of the building in 2016. There was an associated development application with this an associated redevelopment application that was never undertaken. In 2018, October, due to the continuing deterioration of the building, the city issued an order under the property standards bylaw for the repair of the heritage attributes. It included the metalwork, the masonry, and other exterior elements of the building. The owner did not appeal this order, but the order has not been complied with to date. The matter is before the matter of non-compliance remains before the courts. In 2019, the owner submitted engineering and masonry expertise reports suggesting that the building was unsafe and required demolition. The city had these reports peer reviewed by an engineer specializing in heritage buildings and also by a historic masonry expert, both of whom confirmed that the building was safe and did not pose a risk of collapse. In 2021, late 2021, we had another report from the same engineer indicating that the building was at risk of collapse and should be demolished. The city once again had this report peer reviewed by the same engineer who reviewed the building in 2019, and it was determined that the building did not need to be demolished, but that there were concerns about the lateral stability of the building and the existing stabilization system. As a result of these reports, My colleagues in Building Code Services issued 4 separate orders on the building in December 2021, requiring studies and plans to undertake immediate stabilization. Most of this work has yet to be undertaken. Next slide, please. So this brings us to today. The building has continued to deteriorate over time. There has been little to no action on the part of the property owner. The outstanding property standards and building code orders have not yet been addressed. As I mentioned, in May 2022, City Council passed a motion related to this building, which endorsed city staff in escalating enforcement action for both the property standards and building code orders. This will involve the chief building official, the director of bylaw services, and staff within legal and the planning department as well. Next slide, please. The work required on the building is extensive. So in order to get a good idea in preparation for undertaking this escalation of enforcement, the city hired Robertson Martin Architects in the fall of 2021 to provide a condition assessment and conservation guidelines for how to proceed with the work. The report provides a high-level scope and cost estimate for the city to undertake the works identified in both the Building Code Act and the property standards orders. It breaks the work down by element, so masonry, windows, decorative elements, the foundation, etc., and by the level of urgency. So it divides them into urgent, short-term, and long-term repairs. The urgent repairs are indicated to be complete before winter of 2021. These are the very critical things like the foundation stability. The short-term repairs are to be complete by the end of 2023. And then long-term repairs are to be complete at a later date or at the time of adaptive reuse of this building. So if I can get the next slide, please. So the work that is currently going to be undertaken by the city, or initially we are working with the owner. Of course, we are in an ongoing dialogue with the owner to have this work completed by the property owner. However, the urgent works that have been identified to be completed prior to the winter of 2021 are both interior and exterior. So the work required for the foundation, particularly the north foundation wall, is the most critical piece of urgent work that needs to be undertaken to ensure the stability and safety of the building. This work is the primary work that's identified in the December 2021 building code orders. And the required work includes an assessment of the lateral stability of the building and a stabilization plan prepared by an engineer. And it refers both to the 2019 and 2021 peer review reports that were completed by the city. And then after assessment is complete, implementation of the required temporary repairs to ensure that the building remains stable. There is a review and assessment of the basement walls and implementation of structural shoring that's required, and additional masonry repairs required on the upper stories of the building, where you have debonded masonry withes and other issues on the upper floors. Next slide, please. There are also several urgent works identified for the exterior of the building, and these are primarily covered in the property standards order from 2018. And they are divided up by exterior masonry, decorative elements, and windows and doors, and the roof. So all the exposed masonry ends, like you see in the third picture, or I guess the second picture from the right-hand side of your screen, need to be capped. Weather-tight enclosures at the roof and the east end of the building. Again, in that second picture from the right, you can see that the back of the building is exposed with just Tyvek and some tarping and various insufficient enclosure for the weather. Stabilization of all loose and detached metal elements. So as you can see, there are areas where metal decorative work is missing or sort of hanging off the building that needs to be stabilized or temporarily removed until such a time that it can be repaired. And then capping the remnant of the turret. So as you can see in the second picture from the left, a portion of the turret is missing, of course, but the remainder is not weather tight at this point in time. Then there's other work, including installing caps on the cornices, ensuring that all the joints are watertight, and reviewing the interior structure at the bay windows to ensure that they're structurally sound. all of this urgent work that's been identified is really stabilization type work to prevent further deterioration of the building. The interior work is to ensure safety and stability of the building. And then the exterior work is to preserve what we currently have remaining and stabilize it until such a time that the building can be adaptively reused. Next slide, please. So as it's outlined in the report that staff sent a letter to the property owner in May after the council motion that endorsed the escalation of enforcement action. And the dates that were outlined in that report were considered to be milestones or deadlines for the owner to meet as we move towards the city beginning to undertake the urgent works in the fall. The first two deadlines, which were June 6th and June 16th, have both been missed. However, I would note that we did meet on site with the property owner and his team twice last week to go over some of these issues and again encourage him to move towards compliance. It's not the city's goal to undertake this work. We want the owner to undertake this work, but we are mobilizing in case we have to undertake it ourselves. So the next deadline, which is later this week, is to submit a heritage and a planning application for a proposed development on this site. Staff have been in ongoing conversations over the past several years with the applicant, or with the owner, I should say, on a proposed development. And we have committed that should a development application be submitted, staff will do our best to move it forward in an expeditious manner, given the condition of the building. July 30th is the final compliance deadline for the building code orders. And then on or around September 15th, the city will undertake the urgent works if they have not been completed at that time. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've had ongoing meetings and dialogue with the applicant, encouraging compliance with the timeline, ongoing pre-application consultation on the development of the site, and then also a coordinated effort by Heritage, Building Code, Bylaw, Infrastructure, and Legal Services on the planning, procurement, and mobilization of the city to undertake this work. And just as a final point, should the city undertake the work, it would be added to the municipal tax roll under the Municipal Act. I am happy to field any questions you may have and also divert them to my colleagues if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do know that we did before that receive correspondence from David Fleming of Heritage Ottawa, and that he's also registered to speak. So I don't know if he is still available. I see him here. David, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In December of 2007, Heritage Ottawa wrote to Mayor O'Brien and members of council about the need for the city to have, quote, an efficient and timely emergency protocol to permit the direct intervention by the city in the preservation of heritage buildings at risk, unquote. This would be done in order to respond to what has become known as heritage demolition by neglect. Any costs incurred by the city in such intervention would be applied to the municipal tax roll for the property. Over the years, the city has made progress in establishing better lines of communication on how to deal with such properties by better coordinating and the consistent application of regulations involving heritage planning staff, the chief building official and building services branch, and bylaw and property standards officials. Despite this, the political will to approve the implementation of direct interventions has been lacking. After nearly 15 years, we are pleased to see this recommendation for direct intervention to one of the most egregious examples of such neglect. We urge you, and this is based on a comprehensive assessment by the city staff and their consultants. We urge you to strongly recommend the adoption of the procedures outlined in this excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your submission, for your deputation. I don't see any hands raised, so thank you so much. And does the committee now have questions for staff? And I see that Councillor Gower raised his hand first.
I know Councillor McKenney had their hand up before. Councillor, do you want to? I'm quick. So I wanted some clarity from staff on what we can charge back. I know the actual work itself we can reclaim through taxes, but something like the Robertson Martin Architects Assessment Report, does the cost of that get assessed back to the property owner eventually?
Thank you, Councillor. I think I'll refer this question to Stuart Huxley from Legal. I think he's here.
Good morning, Chair, or afternoon. Thank you for the question. The legislation provides that the municipality should have a lien on the land for the amount spent on the repair or demolition under the Building Code Act. And certainly it would be the city's position that the engineering and other consulting advice that would be furthering that repair and other work would form part of that amount.
Well, that's good to hear. I just shudder to think at the number of hours of staff time, heritage, planning, bylaw, building code. It's added up, and I'm sure a lot of that is probably impossible to recoup, but over 15 years, the amount of time and resources devoted to getting this building rehabilitated is incredible. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go on about how egregious this file is. I think I have on many, many occasions over the last 8 years, but I do have some specific questions. On June 6th, you noted that that was the deadline for this building owner to submit a scope of work timeline for review, and you noted that it passed without having that submission. Did the owner even respond to the letter that was sent? Did the owner in any way reach out to staff to say, you know, I'm working on it, I need more time, or did it just pass without any contact or comment?
There was not an acknowledgement of the letter. That being said, staff did write to the owner again once that deadline had passed and reminded him that the deadline had passed. And as I said, we had a couple of meetings on site last week, which were not necessarily prompted by the letter, but related to the work that's required.
Okay, so then on June 16th, we had another deadline passed to submit the building and heritage permit. So same thing. He did not act on that. Did he respond to you in any way before that June 16th deadline passed? Did he reach out to you in any way before it passed?
Well, as I said, we met with him on site twice last week. One of those times would have been probably on the 16th, actually. So I wouldn't say he reached out in relation to the letter, but we have had meetings with him on site recently. So the deadline passed, and staff will advise him again that another deadline has passed. That is the plan going forward, is that each of these deadlines that passes, we will remind him again.
And when you met on site, was that the owner asking staff to come on to site because he has plans? Has he made any overture in any way to suggest that he's going to act on any of the actions that we've set out? Or I guess my question really is simple, like, what initiated the visit? I understand that you were there, but were you there because he asked you to be there because he wants to work in good faith? I'm just trying to get a sense of this owner's intention for meeting any of these deadlines.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the owner did reach out to us to let us know that some work was being undertaken, and so staff and offered for us to come to the site to see what was going on. So that's why staff attended the site the first time, and then our second meeting on site was to talk about sort of more concrete action in terms of what it is that he plans to do to comply with the orders.
And did he suggest why he did not submit a scope of work and timeline, or why he didn't submit the complete heritage permit and building permit application while staff were meeting with him?
No, he didn't.
Any notion that he's going to?
It's hard to say at this point. You know, we are, as I said, the city doesn't want to undertake this work. We want him to do it, so we are really trying to get him to do it.
Except that we know he's not going to do it. I mean, I'm not putting this on you, obviously. I'm sure you're as frustrated as I am, but this owner wants this building demolished. It is evident that he continues to get engineering reports to suggest that it has to be demolished. We've had our own experts tell us that it does not need to be demolished. He continues to submit applications, as you pointed out. The only one he's ever acted on is the one to demolish part of the building, the east wing. So I think that, you know, I appreciate today's update. Share your frustration, certainly, but I have absolutely little to no faith that the June 23rd, the July 30th, or the mid-September deadlines are going to be met with any concrete action that will move us forward. And I just want it on record today that that I am certainly not in any way supportive of extending a deadline because he's 3/4 of the way there, or he started to work on something. This is an owner that wants Somerset House to be demolished by neglect. It is the most egregious example of this that we have. He, you know, kind of pulls us around, if you will, has been since 2007. You know, unless he is meeting to the letter every requirement put in front of him after years of us trying to work with him, I just like to have it on record that I would not be in favor of providing any extension at the point where we're supposed to. I want the city to move in, do the urgent repairs, do the short-term repairs by the end of 2023, and move into those long-term repairs and put it back onto the tax roll. At some point, we'll have to expropriate this property or find another way for someone else to develop this property. So much could be done at this property. I've visited similar properties in Vancouver where they've been turned into social enterprises, libraries, housing. Like, there's just so much that can be done on this property, and we have to at some point take action and actually you know, bring this house into the, you know, up to repair, take it if we need to, and develop it ourselves. So I'll leave it at that. I know that staff work hard on this one, and I do want to acknowledge that. This is not in any way criticism of the work that you've done, but it's just such a frustration. I wasn't even sure that I could comment today, I'll be honest with you, because it's just like I feel like a broken record, and at some point we have to break that record and, you know, just move forward. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff.
Thank you. And I see that Councillor Brockington has raised his hand.
Yeah, although not the local councillor, I would probably share very similar sentiments that Councillor McKenney and even staff have shared with us over years. It's, as everyone has said, an egregious case of neglect, deliberate neglect, and there should be stronger penalties. I think we've talked about petitioning the province to give municipalities a greater authority in this regard, because at the end of the day, as Councillor McKenney has indicated, what the owner would like to see is just this building fall down or be torn down and get a clean slate to build from and to move forward from. I've in the past raised concerns about the stability of the existing building and the safety of passersby, pedestrians, cyclists, people who are in close proximity on both sides of that building. Can staff confirm that it is safe and continues to be safe for people who walk by in that immediate vicinity?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm actually going to ask the Chief Building Official, Mr. Buck, to answer this one.
Thank you, and Chair. Yes, we continue to receive monitoring reports. Since approximately 2016, the most recent building permit, the city has been receiving monitoring reports monthly, although they have fallen off from time to time, and we've had to reorder that they be continue to be produced. We still do receive monthly monitoring reports attesting to the stability of the building as it sits. Of course, there's been, a couple of instances that have been cited here where the owner's engineer has said all of a sudden stability is an issue. We've had peer reviews come in as the report has spoken to. And then our peer review has, of course, said that, while there are some concerns, the building is still generally stable. So those monthly monitoring reports do continue to come in, attesting to the stability of the building as it sits, although obviously not ideal for reuse in its current state. It will require, significant upgrading, likely to, to continue to use the building in an occupied state.
Thank you. And can staff just, again, in summary form, indicate what costs incurred to date can be billed back? Sorry, I'm going to cough. Can be billed back to the property owner, and what costs incurred cannot be?
Do you want to take this one, John?
From a building code standpoint, anything to render the building safe. So there's currently the 4 orders that were mentioned by Leslie previously that were issued in December of last year. They articulated a number of unsafe conditions: the foundation repair work, the lateral stability of the building, the weatherproofing of the building, etc. Because those in fact, the fencing of the building, if that goes down. So any items that have been identified as unsafe conditions in those orders, the city has the ability to undertake whatever measures are necessary to alleviate those unsafe conditions and to render the site safe. And any of those measures can then be charged back to the owner through the property taxes.
My final question is this: what would have to happen for the city of Ottawa to expropriate this property? Like, have we not lived through everything so far other than the building falling down on people? What has to happen before the city says, all right, it's time for us to step in and we're going to take over and we're going to fix what needs to be fixed and take this action?
I'm going to ask legal services to comment on this.
Chair, there's 2 aspects to the councillor's question. One would be what steps would be taken for the municipality to step in and take work. And as the report is outlined and as Ms. Collins has set out, that process is now unfolding under the Building Code Act based on the various orders that the chief building official has issued and the property standards officer has issued. That work can, and if it's not achieved through the property owner, the municipality has a plan and a timetable that Ms. Collins took you through. The question about expropriations is a different question relating to whether council sees a municipal purpose for engaging the Expropriations Act, which is a different process. But for the immediate works that the municipality is looking to achieve will be carried out under the Building Code Act.
Okay, we will be following this file with bated breath. Thank you.
And thank you. I don't see any other hands raised for questions. Are there any general comments? I don't see any other hands raised, but I would just briefly say I share the displeasure, I think, of all members of this subcommittee. And, I understand the ongoing pain of the ward councillor. And I fully believe as well that this is the most egregious example of demolition by neglect. Since the collapse, the building has continued to deteriorate. The city has monitored its condition through the Building Code Act and Property Standards Bylaw. The city has received 31 requests for service, resulting in 11 notices of violation and 6 property standards orders. And the owner still has not undertaken the required action to repair and restore heritage attributes. And the matter remains before the courts with the next hearing scheduled for September. The city has also issued 28 orders under the Building Code Act. The owner submitted reports in November 2021 indicating the building is unsafe. A peer review found no risk of collapse, but some urgent and short-term issues need to be addressed. In December, the chief building official issued orders requiring additional studies and immediate stabilization measures. I'm pleased that the city, through the chief building official, has the authority to undertake work on the outstanding building code and property standards orders and recover the costs from the owner through the tax roll. Should the owner not comply, staff are undertaking required planning and procurement steps to allow the city to mobilize and undertake work on or around the middle of September. So this is very important. I think we need to send a continuous strong message that demolition by neglect will not be tolerated in the city. And I think I thank my colleagues for asking some probing questions on other tools, policy tools, and mechanisms that might be at the disposal of this subcommittee and council to really encourage faster action, because I don't think residents want to see this building that once was a jewel continue to simply deteriorate before their eyes. So I commiserate with Councillor McKinney. I share all the concerns of this subcommittee, and I really thank city staff for their continued oversight over this file and this property. Is the report received?
Received.
Received.
Thank you. And I believe through the consent agenda, we approved a number of items. So I am just moving down to the last series of items that we have. But just for clarity on the application to alter Nicholas Street, and so that Eric doesn't slap my wrist here, I just want to ensure that we dealt with the motion that was brought by Councillor Fleury, but I do want to just ensure for the record that we approve, obviously, that motion as well. So is that motion approved, or that report approved?
Approved.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I believe we did approve as well the inquiries and motions for the period. There are no in-camera items. There are no notices of motion. There are no inquiries. Under other business, there are 2 planning circulations on the agenda, which were distributed to members prior to this meeting. Members of the public have the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca. And those items, the circulation is zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control for 109 through 115 Dalhousie Street. An Ontario Heritage Act application will be considered at a later date. And we also have an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 359 Kent Street and 436 and 444 McLaren Street. As part of the council approved public consultation strategy for this development, the application is being brought to the Built Heritage Subcommittee for 2 pre-consultations in advance of the formal heritage application. The first planning circulation is listed on today's agenda, and I've asked staff to provide a presentation as part of the first pre-consultation. Following the presentation, members will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback in relation to this first technical circulation and consultation. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Thank you, Chair King. That was a very helpful introduction, and you actually touched on the main brief introduction that I was going to provide. So as the chair mentioned, the presentation is associated with the planning circulation for the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 359 Kent Street and 436 444 McLaren Street. I believe this is the first time the committee has seen a proposal for a landmark building. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of policy framework, and then the applicant team can talk to the committee. Next slide. This is just the heritage context. You can see it's located in the Centertown HCD. The two residential buildings on the left side of the screen are on McLaren Street, and the office building on the right-hand side of the screen is a 6-story office tower that was constructed in 1956 as the headquarters for the Royal Canadian Legion. Next slide. Excuse me. So the current proposal is for a 34-story tower with a 6-story podium. The original concept is to demolish the property at 359 Kent Street and retain the two buildings along McLaren. That proposal is evolving, and the architect is here to speak to that today. Next slide. So the policy direction for landmark buildings comes from the Central and East Downtown Core Secondary Plan. The city may permit landmark buildings that exceed the maximum height limits in specific locations and under special conditions to a height of up to 27 stories. Some of the criteria that a landmark building needs to meet is both site-specific or related to the architecture and design. So I put some examples up on screen. You can see there, for example, it needs to be a large corner lot with frontage on 3 streets. It can't be a local neighborhood or corridor designation. And some of the design criteria that it would have to meet includes providing a significant publicly accessible and publicly owned park and or significant public institutional use, not requiring the demolition of a designated heritage building, and being subject to an architectural design competition and or be subject to the city's specialized urban design review process. Next slide. Also, as part of a landmark building proposal, there's a formal review and public consultation program that needs to be adopted by council, and that has happened in this case. So as it relates to BHSC, the consultation program for this application includes the pre-consultation with BHSC, which is here today. Then it will be back again to committee for the second submission, and finally back again to the committee for an application under the Ontario Heritage Act for a heritage permit. Next slide. So heritage staff have been working with our colleagues in development review, urban design, as well as the applicant team, and we have provided comments that focus on the retention and or incorporation of the building at 359 Kent Street, the former Legion headquarters, integration of the new building with the historic buildings on McLaren Street, the overall tower design and site layout, and the importance of sensitive transition to the surrounding neighborhood and HCD. So that's just a brief background information policy framework. As the chair mentioned, the role of the committee today is to review the planning circulation, listen to the applicant team, and ask any questions that you have. If you have comments or questions, you can send them to myself, the committee coordinator, and I will share them with the development review planner, who's the file lead. And I will now pass it over to the applicant team. I believe we're starting with Derek Howe from Taggart Realty Management. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to check with the chair. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you. So, Chair, Vice Chair, members, and members at large, thank you very much for having us here today. On March 23rd, 2022, we had a City of Ottawa Council approved motion for a public engagement strategy. And this meeting today is one of our first of many stakeholder engagement. The purpose of today's meeting is largely to give the committee a brief overview and a heads up of the application that's coming down. It is actually part of our public engagement strategy, which is why we're here today. So I do thank you for your time. I am aware that we only have a few minutes to speak, so I want to be sensitive of the time. One of our primary focuses for this project, we recognize that it is a landmark project. We have spent considerable time first consulting with the councillor's office. We've made them aware of the process. And from there, we have met with representatives of the Centertown Community Association, Heritage Ottawa, members of the Heritage Committee of the Centertown Community Association, and we have a series of additional meetings. Furthermore, we've had a number of working sessions, including one tomorrow afternoon with City of Ottawa staff to go over the heritage aspects of 359 Kent. So I think my overwhelming message I would like to get across to this committee today is that we are spending a considerable amount of time listening, and we were actually criticized at our previous community meeting for not having advanced the concept far enough. And our response to that was we wanted to make sure that we didn't proceed too far to make sure that it wasn't perceived that we were coming in with something that's fully baked. So engagement and collaboration is something we're taking very serious. And I would like to turn it over to our architectural representative of Hoban Architecture, Mr. Patrick Bisson, who will speak a few minutes about some of the discussion about 359 Kent. I wish one more comment is that the heritage homes on McLaren, we are maintaining as is and possibly doing some very modest upgrades to simply improve the condition of these homes. So the predominant focus of the heritage aspects of this subcommittee, ladies and gentlemen, is around the 359 Kent heritage interpretation. I'll turn it over to Patrick, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Derek. Can everybody hear me all right? Yes, perfect. Okay, I will share my screen here with you. If I'm able to share my screen, that'd be fantastic.
I think usually it goes through the coordinator. So I don't know if Eric has your presentation.
Chair, we can try to promote the speaker. It may allow him to share the screen if he's co-hosted.
Perfect.
Just while Patrick is doing that, we will and we expect to come back to this subcommittee at least 1 or 2 more times in the coming months. So this is not sort of the only opportunity to provide comments for this application.
Any luck, Eric?
We'll just need to I'm just reaching out to the team here, the person who can promote. If you could have an indulgence, please, Chair.
Absolutely.
So I think while we're doing this, I just wanted to perhaps highlight a little bit of the direction of the conversation today. Obviously, we've submitted our proposal as part of the rezoning application, but I think today's conversation should sort of focus on obviously the more the heritage aspects of our site. So perhaps a bit less about the architecture. I mean, we can certainly discuss it, but really primarily, I think the importance of the heritage elements on our site would be the focus of the discussion today.
Chair, the speaker should be able to screen share at this point.
Okay,
great. Thank you. Can we all see this? Fantastic.
Can.
Okay. So as part of our submission for the rezoning of 359 Kent Street, there's several important aspects of the site. Obviously, one of them is the landmark policy that applies to the site, but also its important heritage aspects that are tied to the site. So just quickly, site context, as you all know, the site is located at the heart of Centertown. Just in terms of brief history, the site in the early 1900s was primarily low-rise residential homes. And towards the mid-1950s, the site started seeing some new growth, some new transformation. Probably primarily due to the arrival of the Queensway that was starting to be built. And between then and I guess 1976, more buildings of different varieties started to populate the neighborhood. Interestingly enough, if you look at Kent Street, the growth mainly happen, if you look at the map today, east of Kent Street, and everything west of Kent Street, to a certain extent, remain fairly low in terms of its density. So in 1976, we could see that the houses to the east of the building were removed, and beyond that, the rest of the site stayed essentially the same, with the existing building at the corner and the two heritage houses on McLaren. So just quickly, the two houses on McLaren, which are heritage or of interest, and then the existing office building at the corner of Kent Street and Gilmore. As you can see, there is a variety of different typologies to the east of us, ranging from a 22-story building at 415 McLaren, 415 and 420 Gilmore are in the range of 8 to 9 stories. And a bit further down to run on Kent Street, we have 12 to 16-story buildings as well. And again, everything west of our site remains generally low in density. So as part of the landmark policy response, we wanted to look at several things. One, the iconic architecture, which is obviously a work in progress. We've had feedback from the special UGRP, and we're going to be responding to that for the next version. So under iconic architecture, we looked at compatibility with context, preferred massing, shaping identity of Kent Street. Second, we looked at the important civic use. So obviously the site has some historical significance given its original, the original use of the office building at Kent and Gilmore being the Legion House, along with the historical houses along McLaren. And then 3, extraordinary site design. So we looked at how best to integrate the existing homes on McLaren along with our proposal. So in terms of studying the site and looking at the mass, we looked at a variety of different massing options, but ultimately landed on option 4, which looked at positioning the high-rise mass towards the corner of Kent and Gilmore and stepping the building down towards a lower story form along Gilmore as a transition towards the low-rise houses to the east. So basically, separating out the various building parts, obviously one being the tower component, obviously visible in the skyline, 2, the retentions of the 2 existing homes on McLaren, and 3, the contextual mass transition towards the east, and the concept of a corner open plaza at the corner of Kent and Gilmore. So just quickly, some diagrams showing how that podium relates to some of the surrounding context and built form. It's just views looking up and down Kent Street. So in terms of shaping identity, obviously the Legion House played an important role in how we were treating the corner. I just want to emphasize that when we developed the first scheme, the retention of the Legion House wasn't part of the context. It was established that building wasn't to be retained, so it wasn't part of our original context. However, that premise has changed, and that's what we're here to discuss today. But essentially, while developing the first scheme, we did want to retain at least its memory, and how to emphasize that onto the site design was part of our analysis. So obviously, Kent Street during its evolution changed from a two-way street that was highly affected by the arrival of the Queensway, and then once the Queensway arrived, the Kent Street essentially transformed itself into a one-way gateway into the downtown core, essentially impacting some of the development along Kent Street and promoting higher densities east of Kent Street as time went on. So, and basically once that intensification came in, at least along Kent Street, there hasn't been many examples of new high-rise developments, or at least of intensification in recent years. So in terms of historical, site historical significance, obviously the Legion House, as I mentioned before, it was a fairly important use as a national headquarters for the Canadian Legion. I think its use was more predominant essentially than the building form itself, but it remains that it's still an important piece to the site. So essentially, the Legion House started as a 3-story building, was added on in after its construction, obviously, to add the additional 3 stories. And ironically, the Legion House from its original location moved to a smaller location just down the street to this location here, which is 351 Kent Street. So I think conceptually, I think either keeping the building or at least keeping its memory of its use is extremely important to us. And obviously we're exploring various ways in doing that, but it's one of the critical items of our proposal. So just in terms of heritage, how heritage informs the design strategy, I think incorporating a lot of the ground plane public space ties itself into retaining those 2 existing homes on McLaren, and obviously the corner commemorative plaza, as originally intended, was part of that that scheme. Obviously, with the retention of the existing 6-story building as is, that will obviously change or evolve as we decide on a direction. So the 436 McLaren was essentially a Nofke house, which I believe was owned by John Ogilvie back in the day. And then, it was a design house. You can see it's distinctly different from the pattern book houses just to the east of it, which is the one on the left of your screen here. But the scheme aims to tie the public realm apart. It aims to link the public realm with the use of these existing heritage homes as a sort of an added feature. It was the intent that one of the house to the left could be converted into a educational center for youth in the neighborhood. And here we see just notionally ideas of how we can integrate the ground plane and the public plaza and the public space of the development as part of the development. So in terms of the site, obviously we have the 2 existing homes along McLaren, trying to knit in the open public fabric down along Kent Street, pushing the building back, our proposal back, so that we can increase the public realm along Kent Street to reinvent Kent Street as a public and pedestrian pathway. Right now, the existing location of the office building is very, very tight to Kent Street and offers barely any relief. So the pedestrian experience there is quite lacking. So that's one challenge that is important to note if we retain the existing building in its current location. Understanding the street characteristics that exist currently and how our building intends to respond to those is something that we looked at during the development of the scheme. Just a few images of how we could see Kent Street reinventing itself as a pleasant pedestrian realm. Again, increasing the width of the sidewalk to create an actual usable public realm. Gilmore as a street character generally is low rise, although offers some various building typologies. And again, here we see trying to capture that sort of datum line of the low rise to our main podium element that reads about three stories high, and trying to promote porosity through the ground plane of the building as it connects to the rear of the property. There's a courtyard that we'd essentially planned for the rear. And again, really trying to understand the context of the site and making sure that the podium level of our building responds to some of the local masses and built forms that exist. As I was saying, the retention of the two houses on McLaren, where we intend to really tie in that social fabric and use those houses to promote that. I'll just keep going here because I know we're tight for time. So in terms of heritage retention strategies for the existing 6-story office building at the corner of Kent and Gilmore, I think we've looked at four or five different options. So one of them, I'll just go through them quickly and we can chat about them afterwards. But one of them looks like keeping the existing 3-story language, but reinventing that ground plane into a usable public thoroughfare that people can walk through and experience along Gilmore. And obviously retaining the architectural language along the two facades would be ideal, although there are some challenges in how the building is set up with some split levels occurring as you enter the building. But I think we can adjust those fairly easily. The second version of this was essentially a very similar concept, but rather than walking through the building along Kent Street, we use that space as interior space for the building as an entry sequence to the development. The third option is essentially keeping the building in place, obviously creating some slightly different articulations along the front, but in essence, keeping the building in situ and allowing a significant setback from Kent Street to the edge of the high-rise form would give the tower some space to breathe. And then the fourth option is essentially the same, but moving the building back. We'd tear it down, we'd rebuild it as is, but push it back so that we can get that space between Kent Street and the building to go and promote that rich public environment that we think is needed along Kent Street there. And the fifth option is essentially demolishing it, retaining a lot of the materiality of the building and recomposing that, I should say, as part of the ground plane experience or the entry sequence experience for this building, for this proposal. So I'll leave it at that for now. We have a bunch of other study work at the end of this, but I'll open up the floor for questioning and yeah.
Thank you. So does the committee have any questions? And I don't see hands raised. Oh, I see that Member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the pre-consultation here on this site. This is a question for heritage staff, and it has to do with the heritage evaluation of 359 Kent as a property that either meets or doesn't meet the regulation 906. Could staff comment on the work that has been done to assess the heritage character defining elements of the 1956 building, and could that be made available to the committee and more broadly? Obviously, we all appreciate the options that are being looked at by the architects to incorporate some portion of the building, but I think it would be important to understand whether or not there's been an assessment of the building from a heritage perspective. Anne?
Yes, thank you for the question, Member Podolsky. We do have some information we can share, and maybe I'll send it to Eric so that he can distribute it to committee members for their information. In terms of the status of the building, in the previous Heritage Conservation District plan and study, this was a non-contributing building. However, in the new plan that was recommended by committee for approval today, it is considered to be a contributing resource, and heritage staff believe that it does have cultural heritage value, and we've been sharing that with the applicants. So we have put together some information, and we also have reports by the applicant's heritage consultant that I can share with the committee as well. So I'd be happy to circulate that.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? I don't see any. So do any of the members have any comments, specific comments on this item? Seeing no hands raised, I really like to thank, I guess, Derek, Patrick, Kyle for joining us and for providing this update and allowing for the potential for discussion on this planning circulation. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Is there any other business? Seeing none. On adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried.
Excellent. Well, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. The next regular meeting will be held on Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Chair.